to the Board of Selectmen meeting for Tuesday, September 18th, 2018. As always, this meeting is being recorded, so conduct yourselves accordingly. We want to take a moment of appreciation for our troops serving the Middle East and around the world. Thank you. An announcement, Representative Sean Dooley will hold office hours on Wednesday, September 26th, 11:30 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. in the Warrant Room on the first floor of Town Hall. Our first appointment, a public hearing application to solicit Lubin Weaver, representing Revise Energy. Mr. Weaver?
Yes, sir.
Step right up. All right, welcome.
Evening.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're proposing?
My name is Lucan Weaver. I'm a canvas manager for Revise Energy. That's a mass save provider. Most of the people here are probably familiar with it, but paying into one of the big utilities for either heat or electric entitles you to draw from a fund to help upgrade your home, to make it more energy conservative. So look at your insulation, change out light bulbs. I'm not going to give you the sales pitch here, but effectively lower people's bills, make them more comfortable, and it's something that you're entitled to for being a customer of National Grid or Eversource, whatever the case may be.
Revise Energy does the energy assessment?
Yes, sir.
All right, and you've proposed how long to solicit? 3 months?
It's an ideal, depends on the needs of the town, of course, but I'll send like 3 people here, and I tend to just let them go around until we're sure that we've served everyone that we can.
And what hours are you looking to do it?
Let me see which ones am I picking. So we have daylight hours. People typically end up on what we call turf, like 10 or 11 in the morning. We ask about 4 hours of knocking. We have one guy who prefers to go a little bit later in the day, which I do as long as it's not after sundown. And just my team not be knocking any doors after that time.
So sort of 10 a.m. to sundown?
Yeah.
Just to help with sundown these days. Are we talking 7?
As the case,
So
today would be
are
7.
we talking 7 or,
Preferably 6:30 if they ask me.
and the reason I asked the question is I have seen comments from people that
Mhm.
hitting them at dinner is a bad decision, but
Right, it's something we try to balance. We want to get people in their home, but of course, and it's hard to predict when any individual family's having dinner. But we want to respect that. If we notice someone's eating dinner, we'll swing around.
Any questions, Pete?
So, am I understanding right that you guys basically do the energy audits that Mass Save otherwise?
Yes, sir.
People opt into, but you're just trying to go out and get people signed up for it?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
You go canvas door to door, explain the program to people in case they need it, tell them what our availability is. If they're interested, we'll help set them up.
just as an aside for market intelligence, I can tell you that it's not, I don't think it's your company, but another company is marketing by mail, because I'm getting probably a letter at least once a month from someone, and I think they do some work as well, because they talk about, I'm gonna be in the neighborhood, so why don't I come by? So it's not an issue for you.
not my
but just so you
department.
know, it's not, you're not operating in a vacuum here.
We
You've
are
got
not.
people that
So
have,
sometimes we're in a neighborhood
But,
and
yeah.
people, like, we just had it 2 weeks ago with a different company. And
Yeah.
They
But
just
the-
don't tell me.
But I mean, you all know, the program itself, you're basically helping people save money and
Yeah.
generally giving them free stuff, so I think.
It's a
that would
fairly
be-
guilt-free sales pitch, if I'm honest.
Have you done this in Medfield before?
I have been with the company since December of last year, so no, I have not canvassed in Medfield before.
We usually ask folks who are going to do this if you just let the police department know when you're going to be out.
Of course.
Just so they have a heads up. We get reports of people wandering around neighborhoods.
So as the micro, does that mean that we check into the police department every day when we get to turf, or how do you?
That would be preferable, if you could check in each day, maybe a list of people that'll be soliciting.
Okay, that will be who's permitted, but I can send that to you. Absolutely.
I think that may be helpful for you as well, because it's the police department that gets the calls from people telling them about the skulkers in the neighborhood, so if they know you're there, they'll probably.
That's why
run
I'm here.
over.
I don't want my people getting arrested.
Any other questions, Mike?
Nope.
No, it's kind of routine, and it's allowed by the Supreme Court.
Okay. All right, so do we have a motion?
I move that we authorize the company right here, Revise Energy, give them a 3-month period to operate between the hours of 10 in the morning and, let's call it 7 PM or sundown if
Got it.
earlier, for purposes of offering these energy conservation services.
All right. just for 3 months. We'll do it, tomorrow is September 19th, so September 19th through December 19th.
Sounds good to me.
Work? Do we have a second, Pete?
Second.
All in favor?
Yep,
Good luck.
Thank you, gentlemen.
thank you.
All right, citizen comment, Mr. and Mrs. Cook. Welcome. This might be our first official use of the citizen comment portion
Oh,
of
okay.
our Board of Selectmen procedures. We adopted it probably about a year and a half ago, and we might be the first citizens to actually take advantage of our citizen
Oh, I'm
comment.
glad you,
I don't know.
I'm glad you started it, that's,
I don't know about these two, but I've been looking forward to this for like 3 days, ever since the agenda.
well, I'm glad. Thank you for adding that to your agenda, which is good. I'm present because well, first, my name is Tricia Cook, I live at 94 Adams Street. I'm here because of neighborhood concerns about the projects that's going on at 96 Adams Street. On tonight's agenda, you will see on the informational section that you'll be given a memo for the Affordable Housing Trust decision on this project. When myself and several of the neighbors attended that meeting, in 2 previous meetings, we gave them a list of concerns. And my question at that time, at that meeting, was, does this list of concerns make it to the Board of Selectmen when they look this over? And she said no. So that prompted me to use your citizens' comments. So here I am. I've made a packet for you to look over, for your review, to make sure that you understand what our concerns are. I'll give one to each of you.
Thank you.
I'll leave those for you for your review. There's a few neighbors here that attended the last 3 meetings, and I was told that they could voice their concerns if they prefer to. Lauren or John?
I'll just, no, we're happy to hear all of you.
Okay.
We have the informational on our agenda
Okay.
tonight. This project is not on our agenda tonight, so we're
Okay.
happy to hear you. It'll be put on our
Okay.
agenda for actual review of the project at some point later
All right.
this fall.
All
So,
right.
But I'm
Well,
happy
you
to hear
have
just
your
to let you know
packet?
we can't give you any action tonight.
No, I wasn't, I
One way or
know
the
that.
other.
I know the next step would be in front of you, so I wanted to make sure you had everything, all of our concerns in front of you before you start to review. I only make one more comment. Considering that there's a senior initiative going on, I and all the neighbors are really concerned about disturbing the backland that will disturb the ecology, that will disturb the vernal pool, and it's a small space, it's under 5 acres, and if you review, you'll see our other concerns. But I was wondering if the senior initiative could use just a side piece of land and perhaps put a row of maybe 6 or 8 condos in a row, similar to the ones that are down on 27 before you get to the group of $1 million condos. There's a group that goes that way and there's a group that goes that way. Similar to that. I mean, that would be something to really maybe think about for the 55 and older initiative. Thank you very much.
I was wondering, Lauren Harrington, 90 Adams Street, and I asked the Affordable Trust, since this is going to be over 55, when you did the survey, what did they expect to pay? This is supposed to be a $600,000 unit. There's going to be 8 buildings, 16 units. And the Affordable Trust said that people in Medfield wanted to pay $350,000 to $450,000. So if they're not sold, will they be rented? And the proposal is that it shows no yards there, and if they're, children and all. My concern is that's a very dangerous intersection, 27 and West Street. You've got Hillside there. Our people that are going to be living in the units behind us will be flowing out also to that intersection. The Legion probably is going to be apartments. We have Dale Street that's coming up with more building. And, the traffic, there's usually, I'm glad the fire chief's here too, because I think that this project has one egress. And what we're concerned about is, the entrance and exit for fire vehicles, ambulances. And, I hope the police and the fire will also take a look at this proposal.
Yeah, I'm sure they will.
John Harrington on 90 Adams Street. I'm a neighbor, and I think also that many of the neighbors are very concerned about the flow of traffic through our street, the increased presence of businesses. I really think that the town is going to be faced with a serious safety factor. And already there's, our little street is across through street, and it seems like quite a few of the citizens, they take advantage of that street, and there's no really adherence to like speed limits. And you're going to be dealing with a senior population. They might have mobility factors. There are going to be some individuals that are going to be physically challenged, and I think I can only see down the road in the long range for the town. I can see enormous problems. It seems like you're compacting a lot of buildings in a very small area. And a lot of the charm of Medfield, of course, is Medfield's rurality. And will be, unfortunately, maybe that will be a thing of the past, I don't know. But I just thought maybe if the board could consider that anyway. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other comments, Peter, Gus, questions? Nope. Okay, so this will be on our.
I had a couple questions. Can you maybe just, on your plans, indicate to us which are the lots that are in question that are being proposed to be developed?
It's actually the area behind it.
You turn the page this way.
It's this one, I'm assuming.
This is the one that's being sold. All of these starred areas are vernal pools. This is where I live. This
So
is
it's-
where I live. I'm
so
sorry,
it-
this is, no, not, I'm sorry, I'm looking at 99. This is 96. Scratch that out.
So it's this one here?
Yes, and they're gonna put one road here and go around and back and do a cul-de-sac and come back.
And this little square is part of it too?
No, this is, yes, it is part of it, actually. It's
Okay.
here, here, all down here.
Well, this is the railroad track.
Yeah, all down here, up here, over here.
Yeah,
So
okay.
it goes like this. So if we had one that went like that for 55 in the $400,000 to $500,000 range, I think that there's a builder that would probably be interested in that too. So, that's it.
All right, where's the vernal pool, do you know?
All of these starred areas.
Oh, they're
are vernal
wetlands.
pools. Yep.
Okay.
Well, actually, if you look at this page here, which was taken from called the Certified Vernal Pools via Oliver Mass GIS's online mapping tool, you'll see that they're checked off right here, Certified Vernal Pool, and there's the smaller copy, so I just made it bigger so
Oh,
you can
I see,
actually
all
see
right,
it.
all right. All right,
And this is pictures here. Vernal pools tend to dry out. This is the dried out. This is the tire that's there now. This is the vegetation type that's there, and this is the whole vegetation, which I'm sure conservation would know more than I would. And this is the salamanders that I found 30 years ago when I moved there. And these were taken this summer in the pool, one of the neighbors' pools, and this was on our house, and that's one of the tree frogs.
yeah.
that
Well, I
was
think
taken.
I think you're right, the spotted salamanders do breed in vernal pools, is
Yeah.
my understanding.
Yeah.
So the other thing that it's not a question this time, it's just a comment, because the senior housing survey indicated, my reading of it was that the people indicated that they were looking for a price point that was between $350,000 and $600,000. It's a little different than the price points that you said, but
Affordable, yeah.
It just-
They said 350 or 450, because I said, are they willing to pay 600,000, and, because it was gonna be strictly 55.
there were different people, different amounts of people in different ranges, but the survey seemed
We were
to,
told 650 for the for the 12 units, and then 200, oh, sorry, 650 for the 12 units, and the 4 units that would be affordable housing would be 200,000 each. So if you add that all up, that's 7,200,000. If you did a row, you're down to maybe you could get up to 5 million. But you don't have all that excavating that you'd have to do back there and the ruining of property.
The other thing that I would say is that it doesn't comply with zoning, so it has to go to the ZBA, so that that's where there'll be a lot of discussion about the details of what it should and shouldn't
So the
be.
next step would be zoning, or is the next step conservation?
Next step is here.
Oh, here.
So they're applying to be a local initiative program project. And so the first step is approval by the Board of Selectmen. Then it would have, if we were to approve it, it would then go to the state for approval. It would then come back to the ZBA
Am
for
I right
further
to,
discussion.
am I right to understand that the new senior initiative that targets just 55 and older? in the
62
ra-
and over.
Oh, yes, 62 and over, for price range between 400,000 and 500,000 is different than what they're applying for. They're applying for affordable housing,
Correct. So they're applying under a comprehensive
Right.
permit under 40B,
Right.
so they have to have the 4 affordable
40B,
units.
right.
The senior housing overlay district
Mm-hmm.
would not require affordable units in
Exactly.
the developments. And so
Exactly.
it would still provide for greater density,
Mm-hmm.
because you just can't build kind of rural houses that are in a price point that seniors want to pay.
Right,
Developers are happy to build, $1 million houses on acre lots, and that's what they'd prefer to build in town.
right.
So under the proposed overlay district, which will be voted on at a special town meeting, you wouldn't have to have affordable units except unless it
Yes.
fell under the inclusionary zoning within the RU district.
And if I'm right to understand, they could be duplexes, they could be condos, they could be anything.
Anything.
And,
Yeah.
but the price point is probably more feasible for people over 62 that want to stay in town to be between 400 and 500.
Yeah, it would depend on the project,
Yeah,
right? I mean, so
okay.
you'd have some developers who'd want to do
Right.
projects that were like Old Village Square, would have a price point of $1 million.
Yes.
And you'd have some developers who, under the same rubric,
Right.
it's kind of, there's not a price, the overlay district doesn't have a price restriction on it. So it's not
Exactly.
affordable housing as defined by the state. It does permit, if it's a senior-focused development, I mean, there's not a lot of land it applies to in the town, but it does permit for senior developments, some relief from zoning pursuant to a special permit process, not through the state, just through the planning board.
Exactly. And please take in mind that having 6 individual residences or condos, let's say, would bring, 12 to 16 cars versus 32. Big difference. Thank
So
you.
one of the, just because you're here, because this is actually something we'll talk about later in the meeting, but you're probably aware of the senior housing survey that also went out, and that's in the process of being written up. But one of the interesting conclusions or observations that's come from that is that we have 2 issues. One is there are some seniors who need effectively affordable housing, senior housing, which is what we focused on. There's a greater number of seniors that actually don't qualify for affordable 40B housing, that actually need senior formatted housing. So when we start talking about price ranges, I think in the discussions we've had on that side of it, the target range for the affordable housing was 350 to 500,000. It sounds like there are some seniors, the issue is I can't find housing that's designed to make it easy for me to live in, and if I could even maybe go up to 600,000. So there's 2 different, that's coming out of the survey, there's actually 2 different groups. Not all of them are looking for the 350,000.
So when this comes back to the selectmen, the issue here really is a policy decision, whether or not this is a good concept for the town to get behind, and the selectmen will make that decision. And then regardless of whether we get behind it or not, it can then go to the ZBA, but it has a much greater chance of succeeding at the ZBA if the selectmen have recommended it. The ZBA will get into the nuts and bolts of the details of the design.
Do you take conservation into
That's,
Look at it as a whole.
conservation is the only area that's excluded from the 40B process. They are separate, but the distinction is they only must qualify under the state conservation regulations, not under the towns. And the towns is more strict than the states. Now, do you know whether the vernal pool has been certified by the state?
According to the map of the GIS, it has been.
It has been, okay. So that
And
is,
they're asking for, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I didn't mean to be so long. They're asking, if you look at point number 2, the builder is requesting relief from local wetland bylaws for he thinks it's a 50-foot buffer, no disturb, but he wants to bring it down to a 25-foot buffer. I'm not privy to what that bylaw is, but I know under the NHESP in Medfield's conservation, requires a 100-foot buffer as well as a 50-foot no disturb.
So I think those are the level of details that the selectmen typically will not get into, that the conservation, that we would expect the Conservation Commission to deal with those wetlands issues.
So you don't speak with them before you decide? Okay.
No, no, we just sort of look at it in a global context of, does this idea make sense for the town?
Okay. And will the builder come and present the plan to you, and you'll see that there's one egress, and that maybe the fire department will look at it, and the police, to see the plan there?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Laurel? You don't need the microphone. You need the microphone. You've been here enough to know that, come on.
Summer's over, we're back. I was just gonna comment on the amount, the $600,000 amount. Some of our seniors are eliminated from the 40B don't meet the 40B requirement for income because their home is worth $600,000. So they'll sell their home, and then it'll be a wash for them. All they will have is the $600,000 to pay for it, but they'll still be on a limited fixed income, and that's the catch-22.
Yeah, what I was talking about is what the survey respondents said they thought they could afford. So either people just said, well, if I can pull that equity out of my house, I can throw it all into another house, or it's not, there's a significant number of people who are looking for affordable housing. My point was, I think going into it, we were thinking we need to find, how many affordable housing units do we need for seniors? There's actually another group of seniors that they're not as sensitive to the affordable piece of it as they are to senior-friendly design.
this goes way back. We had that fight with the state on this over Allendale, because we said, seniors are on fixed incomes. They can't afford the mortgage payments for a certain level. And they said, these are the regulations we use, and we're directing them towards young families starting out. They did change, and now there's been a recognition that with so many of us baby boomers going over the hill, that there needs to be a recognition that there's a senior housing crisis as well, senior affordable housing crisis. So that is a problem that the state has sort of recognized, but not fully recognized, because you're right, if you take that money and sell your house, you don't qualify.
Right, and I think starting from where we are now with very little senior housing at all, and we have a significant senior population in town, we're not gonna be able to accommodate even a material percentage of them, but I think, starting from a base really of 2, we have Turtle Brook and Tilden Village, which is obviously a different situation. That's really all we have for truly senior-oriented housing. So starting from that to doing a little bit better is probably the best we're gonna be able to do, as opposed to really meeting the demand. We meet a little bit of the demand.
Although just not to argue against your position, but just to look at it more broadly, if the Hinckley project that we've been talking about goes in, that's 16 to 20 units. Not that I'm saying this should go in, but if suddenly out of the blue, a project comes in with another 16 senior housing units, now we're starting to move faster than I thought we could move to try to address some of these. And there is a significant number of seniors that basically have said, if you had it right now, I would move. So, I'm not arguing against where you're coming from here, but at the point that developers understand that there's a need and they come up with good solutions, that's gonna help us out.
Is the,
In response to that, then, in response to that, you might want to pay attention to points 3, 4, and 5. Thank you.
Yeah, so that's nice. You can do density. I'm Steve, Tricia's husband. It's great. You can do density and adjust the zoning a little bit and provide senior housing, really first floor living and access and all that. And, yeah, possibly, so if there is an issue with these vernal pools, the builder could still put enough units in where none are affordable and get his price point, like you're saying. I'm sure there are people like down on North Street, those units sold quick, and there's a lot of
Well, if it was
widows
a lip,
and
if it's a lip
older
though, you're
people
gonna,
and-
if it is a local initiative project, they don't just choose what they want. If you want this kind of cooperation from the town, it
Yeah.
has to fit the price.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, so this will be on our agenda for one of our future meetings this fall. I don't think we figured out when it will be. I know you are all well within the abutter zone, so you'll get a specific notice of that meeting in the mail. It'll also be on our agenda for when it's gonna be. I don't know when it's gonna be. It may be in October or November, I'm not sure when. We'll have to sort that out when we go through our schedule later today, but you'll have advance notice, and I really appreciate your coming in for this, our inaugural commenting citizens.
if we had a ribbon to say you're the first, we'd give it to you, but we don't have any of those ribbons.
I will not.
Well, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Our next item, Chief Wilhelming, to discuss a number of items.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Hello.
What would you like to tackle first?
Well, the first one on here is, we'll start with what you wanted to talk about, and then we'll go to what we want to talk about, or what I want to talk about.
Great, traffic lights.
Starting with, damaged Main Street traffic lights and plan of action.
So, I don't know if any of you remember, but back in, I think it was early July, we had we had some really bad lightning. And the lightning actually had a direct hit on the traffic system downtown along Main Street and basically took out all 3 lights in the center of town. They came out and made the repairs of what they had to do just to get it up and running. And I do have those amounts. I believe you have the memos in front of you. So right now, in all 3 traffic boxes, there is a loaner control board in each one, so it's a temporary fix. So we have to make a decision whether we want to put new parts in there, have the parts repaired. Right now, to date, just to get them up and running the way they are, we're already into it for $30,980. If we want to replace with all new equipment, the total would be $46,000, but the $30,980 is already included in that amount, so that's the total amount. I did speak to Maya, the insurance company. Actually, I believe we have the check. Joy has the check. They will pay $25,000 with a $1,000 deductible, so we have a check for $24,000, which will help.
What's the basis of that insurance coverage?
That type of insurance coverage?
Why 25,000?
I don't know. Quite frankly, I didn't think they'd pay anything with a lightning strike. But I can't speak to as far as why they only pay. You're saying why they only pay
Well,
25?
yeah, my real question is, we're
Yep.
carrying insurance.
Right.
I'm curious about the coverage, because there's one piece of this that's the repair work that they did immediately after the strike.
Correct.
And then there's this other piece, which is to replace the equipment. And it seemed an odd shortfall. It neither seemed to cover the new equipment, and so I was just curious, why was it 25,000, and why are we covering insurance that, there may be good reason, but
Right, and I
why
can
are we
only-
covering
I can only
insurance that
get-
seems to cover 60%?
I can only guess
right?
that because it's an act of God.
I think Michael can answer.
Yeah, I think it's depreciation. They depreciate the
Oh, so they're
equipment.
okay.
So they're not paying you what it would cost today. They're paying you what the depreciated value of the existing equipment is.
So in 3 to 5 years, it's dropped off that much?
I would think probably yes. That's, and I say they're probably being generous in that.
Okay.
We really didn't expect them to pay anything. When we had a lightning strike at the town hall about 15 years ago, they refused to pay anything for the damage, so we were actually excited to receive the check from them this time.
Okay.
So, I mean, the lights are, like you just said, they're only 4 to 5 years old. My recommendation would be to replace them with new equipment, which, given the insurance and everything, would cost us $22,000. I would actually need some help with that, because I don't have that in my budget.
Right, Chief Wilhelmy would need to seek a reserve fund transfer for the 22,000 to do a full replacement.
Let's deal first with the recommendation. What's the normal life cycle for this equipment?
Well, hopefully it's longer than 4 or 5 years. I would say it's gotta be at least 10 or 15 years.
Yeah, I think when Chief Meany and I originally talked about putting them in, we had planned on a 10-year life cycle.
Yeah.
Having come through Medway yesterday and seen the money they're spending up there on traffic lights and everything else, I would say we should get our reps in and say, what's wrong with us? You pay Westwood, you pay Millis, you pay Medway. What have you got for us? You know, they might not be able to get it right away, so you might have to do a temporary fix. But I think if you look in this edition of the Beacon, there's a lot of money that was thrown in there for different transportation projects. And, you know, granted, the state wants to spend it on bike paths and transit-related road projects, but I think our legislative delegation should be in a position to try to get something maybe in next year's budget for it.
Do we
I
know
mean,
what-
if they will pay Ashland $25 million for a public safety building, they ought to pay for us to repair our lights.
Is that Senator Spilkey's district?
Yeah,
So she's chair of the Senate Ways and Means Committee?
the Senate President now.
Oh, okay, so she gets the big money. Well, I remember years ago when John Rogers was looking to become speaker, Norwood got $1 million for something out of the budget one year. I mean, I don't know what our legislators get the other towns that they represent. Do you guys know that?
Needham got $2 million for its public safety building. The big thing we got was the hospital purchase.
I saw that Representative Dooley got something for some town.
He got some bridge funding for, I think, a couple towns.
We did receive $30,000 in the suicide prevention money.
Yeah, that was the only money we got this year out of the state, I think. But it sounds like the other towns are getting a lot more than we are.
No.
We have no state roads in Medfield. Everybody thinks 27 and 109 are state roads. Every single road in Medfield is either town road or a private way. There are no state roads.
So let me go back to why I asked the
Sure.
question to start with. I think you said in the memo that the equipment has been, it's like 3 to 5 years old, so somewhere.
4 to 5, yeah.
Say,
Yeah.
4 or 5 years old. If there had been a long, 10 years is like just right at the crux point here. If it had been a 20-year life cycle, my first thought would be, no, don't get new equipment, fix the equipment you have, because this equipment should last for 20 years. If it's a 10-year life cycle, then it's, you know, if you're halfway through that 10-year life cycle, then I can see that you might put the new stuff in now, because you're gonna wind up replacing it in 5 years anyway, presumably, if it's only a 10-year life cycle. So that's one piece that I would, just in terms of thinking about it, that's where my head was at, is it's like, if it's really new equipment, then fix it. Don't just what happens if we get another lightning strike next year? Are we gonna have the same discussion about, let's replace it? So I'm not pushing for that, because if you're halfway through a projected life cycle, then between the depreciation that you're talking about, which is only gonna continue to go down, the insurance coverage, and the fact that 5 years from now, presumably, you'd wind up having to replace it, I think that's a little more reasonable to go with the new equipment, just because
Well, and also, and maybe Mo can speak to this as well, I mean, to Mike's point about Medway, I mean, I think, I'm assuming the new traffic lights in Medway are part of the reconstruction of 109 project that they have. And I know the last time we talked to Mo about where we might fit on the tip for our section of 109, he thought it might be 10 years.
So this might work out.
And so, and if you did it for 5 years, you might be replacing them and then getting new ones 5 years hence
Yeah.
and that, so, if that's, is that still?
Right now, we're in a conceptual design process between the Millerstown line and Hartford Street. That's the main areas where we're looking at for the reconstruction of Route 109. We're going to have a public informational meeting sometime in the near future to discuss the project, but we can incorporate the traffic lights along 109 in that project. It's going to be, right now, just rough estimates, about a $12.1 million project to put on the tip. We have a good shot at putting it on the tip. I think it's a really prominent project that the state would, because we are the kind of the gateway between the east and the west, trying to get people in and out of Boston. So I think we have a good shot at getting this onto the tip. It's a lot of money, but we do have to come up with a design, which is anywhere between 10 and 14% of the total cost.
So if that happened, what's your projection on when that project might actually?
I'd love to get it. We're looking at anywhere between 6 and 10 years, but I don't want to get everybody's hopes up that quickly. But we have to keep moving along on it. We can't just drop.
You didn't say less than 5.
So the way it works is that if you keep pushing the project further and further into the design process, you have a better shot of getting the money and getting on the tip faster and pushing to the money. A lot of people put projects on, a lot of towns, and they don't push that design, so it stalls, and then the money has to be spent, so they go to projects that are ready to go. But we have to get on the tip first, and our engineers are helping us to do that, so we are trying to be aggressive with that.
Do we have a source for the funding for this?
We would seek a reserve fund transfer.
We what?
We would need a
Reserve
reserve
fund
fund transfer.
This early in the year, huh? Yeah.
So let me get to that then. My view, having spent 6 years on the warrant committee, is, and we've done this in the past, at this point in the year, I would be inclined not to do a reserve fund transfer, to ask you to try to pull what you can out of your existing budget to cover it. But you understand, if we approve this, that you can, when the time comes later in the year that you need the money, you don't have to kind of re-justify. It's just we're saying, do what you can to minimize the demand on the reserve fund now, if you have opportunities in the budget. When the time comes where it's clear, the fuse is burned, come back to us then and ask us to do that. There's 2 reasons for doing it. I think, Mike, your facial expression when he first said this early in the fiscal year is we don't know what the other demands on the reserve fund are right now. So if we start chewing up $150,000 reserve fund in the first quarter of the fiscal year, and other things come up, we can get ourselves in trouble on the reserve fund because we've pre-committed stuff early instead of trying to keep the gunpowder dry. If we get in trouble in the reserve fund, we know that we're in trouble in the reserve fund, then when the annual town meeting comes, we can do something to replenish it. So it's not like that's a reason why you wouldn't dig a hole that you can't dig yourself out of by next April. So that's my
We
thought
can
on
also do
that.
the year-end transfers as well.
That
as
too,
part of
yeah.
it,
So my thought would be that that's probably how we would want to pay for it, which means you don't get paid right away. We ask you to do what you can to absorb it if you can. But the understanding is you've made the case now
So in
that
that,
we would acknowledge.
to
in
answer your
spring.
question, guys,
Yeah.
in my line item for that, I have 16,500, so I
Mhm.
could put that, I still need some help. If,
I'll work
then-
with you on it.
Okay.
We'll work.
Okay.
I know what you're talking about.
but I'd still need a recommendation on whether you'd like me to replace them or repair them.
What's your timetable on this?
Well, I mean, he hasn't sent any bills, and we're into the company now for 30,000 already.
We have loaner equipment currently
Yeah,
in the.
so we
in
gotta
the
do
traffic
something
lights. So
soon.
at some point, somebody else is gonna need that loaner equipment, and
Yep.
we're gonna have to make a decision, so.
And I guess I would lean towards the new, just given the timing of it and the possibility that we may get a whole new system in 6 to 10 years, which is probably gonna be closer to 10 than 6, just given the way these things go. And given that 10-year life cycle, you wouldn't wanna do refurbish them, have them work for 5 years, then have to get new ones in 5 years, and they last for 2 years, getting the whole, because we're getting a whole different kind of fancier looking streetlights as part of the, you know, Midway's got those fancy street lights now, presumably that's part of the look for the 109 look that they're doing for this stuff, so I would think new. I don't know, Pete, what do you think?
I would be inclined towards new, given the timeframes that I've heard, that if it has a lifespan of 10 years, it strikes me that, and we're 3 to 5 into that already. But I guess this is the sort of decision that I would look to the town administration to get an opinion from as to what we should be doing. I'm
Have
not
to
an
come up
expert
with
on
it.
traffic lights.
You cannot appropriate the money from free cash because free cash disappeared July 1st. And you don't have free cash until it's certified again by the Department of Revenue, which usually takes place the end of October, beginning of November.
But how about the issue of new versus replacement?
Well, it's, as Jerry Maguire would say, show me the money. If we come up with the
Well, I
money,
think we can pay it out of, we have $16,000 in the traffic light line item. We can pay the 16 out of there. We can pay for it out of other items in the budget, and then we may have to come back for a reserve fund transfer at the end of the year.
I mean, it sounds like if we got 24 from the insurance company and 16 in
Right.
the budget, that's 40.
Right.
And so the
We'll-
delta is 6 if we go
Right.
new, right,
Right.
roughly 6.
So we can pull the 6 from other items in the budget, and then knowing that we may possibly have to come back at the end of the year.
Right, you may have to come back if you have other traffic light issues as well. Like,
Right, that's the other issue. is this-
Hopefully not. but-
Hopefully not,
Yeah.
but I mean, if you have other, you know, we'll deal with it. It's just easier to deal with once you have a better sense of, you know, to Gus's point, what the picture is for reserve funds for the year. And we also have more options as you get towards the end of the year as to where we can pull money from, so.
So I guess I had another question about it, which is, was this properly grounded? Do we know if it was just an act of God, or are we sure that our installation was correct? Because I guess the traffic lights probably have to be a target for lightning.
Well, I mean, the people that come out are engineers. I would hope that they would know what they were doing, but,
Oh, they haven't said one way or the other as to the causation?
well, they said it was a direct strike by the lightning.
And nothing survives that,
Yeah.
probably.
these lightning strikes can be very erratic too. When the town hall was hit, we have, I believe, 11 lightning arresters on the town hall. And so the building was extremely well protected.
Yeah.
It came and hit the pole next to Starbucks. It hit a transformer, knocked out the transformer, and that went down underground into the building. So it was a very unexpected route of entry that the lightning hit. And that's why they wouldn't pay, so. So, yeah, even the best laid plans that you think you've covered everything, you still get these unusual freak things that happen, so.
Yep.
Plus, our lights are not exactly new. I mean, the fixtures themselves are pretty ancient by lighting standards, so.
Yeah, the other consideration for me is that I bet you if there's any lights in town that represent a headache for the police department, it's those 3 lights. Those are the ones I
Yes.
mostly read about, so I can see why we would go with new equipment, just to minimize the likelihood that you're gonna have system glitches that cause more software and programming problems than it seems like they already do, so.
Yeah, correct. I mean, it's a heavily traveled road.
Yeah, yeah, so I would agree, we'd go with the chief's recommendation.
Do we need a motion?
Just don't wanna give
I
us
think,
money
I
right
think a
away.
motion to,
I think a motion.
We'll make
would
it
be in
work.
order here.
Okay, I move that we approve the repair of the traffic lights that were struck by lightning in Chief Wilhelmi's request to replace them with new equipment.
perfect.
The understanding that you've come in with requests for additional funds, asking you to do what you can.
We'll make
And
it
then, if later in the year it turns out we have to make a reserve fund transfer request, we understand that's a potential liability.
Second?
All in favor?
Yep.
All right. Chief, is the holiday stroll expenses, is that you too?
It's Jean Minio. I kind of had everybody come in to talk about holiday stroll expenses.
Well, let's do that. Is that in play with the chief as well?
What, I,
No.
It really involves the board.
Are you
of
talking
Selectmen
about the
and
barriers?
And the sport, yeah, the barriers. So
Okay.
last
So-
year, the selectmen paid for the barriers and other items with the helps of the department. Jean Minio asked that you have that same support, so
Mm-hmm.
I asked everybody to come in so that we actually have.
And actually, didn't some of that money come out of the downtown
Correct.
improvement funds?
Correct.
So,
How much of an amount is it?
It's $1,800 last year.
Okay.
can we limit it to the same, a similar amount as last year, so
Well,
we don't get
I think it
unexpected?
might be slightly higher than last year because we're gonna extend where we had the barriers for last year, so.
I think we have to do it up on 27 a little bit too.
Correct.
Yeah, that was the one thing.
I believe the stage is gonna be set up different, so having it extend along 27 a little more would actually be necessary this year.
Because that was the one, that was a huge improvement last year from what it was in the past. And the one area that was kind of not covered as well was the area on 27, kind of on that end of Baxter Park.
Right, correct.
Where there's obviously a lot of activity with people around there. So I think that was the one addition. I think when we kind of looked at it at the end of last year's, I'm glad this came on here, by the way, because this is something that was on my list for things to talk about, sort of heading back towards the holiday stroll. So, I mean, what would the projection be cost-wise to add that?
Well, I mean, I
additional-
would have to go out there and actually measure how much more you want to give. It basically breaks down to, last year we did about 258 feet of coverage. I talked to Lydell, who's the one that supplied the barriers, and they're 6-foot, they call them water barriers, and they're roughly $42 a section, so it depends on how much coverage you want. I mean, if you did like another 150 feet, you're looking at a little over an extra $1,000. So we'd have to measure exactly how far down 27 you want to go. To the end of the park,
And I would think sort of towards the end of the park, or at least kind of sort of past that halfway mark of the park where you're kind of, there's one of those sidewalks there where it kind of.
And that's assuming the same price per 6-foot.
I actually talked to them today, Mike. They said their price is pretty consistent, and they would honor the same price.
Okay.
I mean, it's a great event. I mean, it's a great event for our downtown. It's a great, I mean, it gets so many people there, to kick off what is really a top weekend.
And last year you had the weather on your side, it was beautiful. Yeah.
Do you wanna set a not to exceed fee of $3,000? We'll go out and get our final quotes and make sure it comes in around that.
It's good for me. Pete?
Sure,
Yeah.
sure.
All right. So you want a motion on that?
So I move we approve holiday stroll funding support out of the Selectmen's Downtown Development
Economic
Economic
improvement.
Improvement budget. It's actually not downtown either, it's the town economic improvement
Yes.
budget. Up to, not to exceed $3,000, but to be defined once the specific plans for extending the holiday stroll area have been nailed down.
Second?
All in favor?
Yep.
Aye.
All right. Traffic enforcement. So this is one of our additions,
Sure.
Chief. And I will say for myself, that obviously this has been a subject of significant discussion in the Board of Selectmen, and I think significant concern certainly for me, and I think for Pete and Gus as well. And I have noticed increased enforcement around town. It certainly seems like there's more cars out there, there's more effort. You just want to talk a little bit about what you've been doing and sort of what your plans are and what the status of all that is?
Sure. I can start off by saying that citations are actually up 25% this year over last year at the same time. And actually, in the month of August alone, compared to August of last year, they're up 145%. Some of that is due to a grant that I got through the state for crosswalk enforcement, which you've probably seen the guys out there doing. And some of it's just increased enforcement overall. Every shift, they're instructed, they're given certain streets. It's based on complaints that we get from residents to go out. We have the radar trailer out. I'm trying to remember where it is now. I just saw it. But we have an officer that's in charge of that and puts the radar trailer out. And they usually leave that out there for a couple of weeks and then follow it up with enforcement to see if people actually slow down when they see that, because they see their speed right in front of them. And it does help. Yeah, I mean, they're out there every shift. Like I said, they're given a list of streets on where to concentrate, and I'm very happy with their efforts so far. I don't know if you have any specific questions.
No, I just wanted to check up about it, because we talked to Chief Meany about it a lot, and we had
Yep.
yet to have a chance to bend your ear about it. And so
Yeah,
I'm
well,
giving
I
you
mean,
that opportunity to have your ear bent on the topic.
It's an important subject. It's, yeah, I mean, I'm I'm on them all the time. I think they do a great job, actually. They've been doing well up there, so we're gonna continue.
Any other questions?
No, I guess up 25% over last year sounds good. I mean, I've had a general sense that we don't have as much enforcement as Dover. For instance, I don't know whether that's real or not, but that's the way I drive to work, and so I see the officers there doing their radar. But, that's just my ad hoc experience, so.
I mean, I hope they can get that 25% up, even more. And, these are broken down, obviously. Some of them are written warnings. Sometimes a written warning does it just as good as anything else, so.
Yep.
But yeah, no, they're out there. Their citations are up.
I mean,
Ideally, they'll come back down, right? Because what you want to do is you want to get to the point where people are
It's a learning, yeah.
trained to think that there's a chance they could get a ticket, so they'll drive slower, right? And so I don't want it shouldn't be.
So if they dip down, we're doing a good job.
That's exactly it. Well, I think if people are driving slower around
Until we
town-
tell you that you need to
Right.
do more.
If people are driving slower around town, we'll know you're doing a good job. And that's sort of the measure. I think it's good that they're up because I think they were very low historically. But I don't want it to just be a numbers game to say we have to constantly get them up, because what we really want to have is the notion, if you are driving on streets in Medfield, you really ought to make the speed limit because you have a decent chance of getting a ticket, right? Which is true, and I would add Westwood to that list as well. I mean, the routes that I drive to work, and on the sort of cut-through streets, in most of those streets, there is, I would say 3 out of 5 days, someone between here and Needham and Dover, and most days in Westwood, there's somebody in Hartford from the Westwood, they must make a fortune on Hartford Street, and they have somebody there all the time. So that's good to hear, because it is something, I would say it's probably of the concerns I hear from citizens directly who write to me or talk to me, I would say that's probably the most common thing I hear, is people speeding on side streets, speeding even on North Street where, it's a cut through, it's a 30-mile-an-hour street, and the sidewalks are not big curbs there, and so, it is a residential street. I would say it's probably, I hear a lot about that, so.
Yeah, I hear a lot about it too, and it's not just the side streets, it's Hospital Road and Harding and.
Yes, any questions?
I'll make a comment, and it's probably got more to do with the three of us, given that we have 2 special town meeting articles about being able to lower speed limits in certain areas. I think enforcement is the right direction to go as opposed to lower speed limits, but I've heard a lot of citizens, well, I want 20-mile-an-hour zone on my street and residential drivers only. And it's like everybody would like to have a 20-mile-an-hour private road in front of their house.
But 50 mile an hour as soon as they get off their
Well,
street.
And the reason I raise it, it's, I think, more with you guys, to the extent that people ask for that, even if we have the authority to do that, can be a big mistake. Because if you sit there and you artificially have low speed limits, they are artificially low, then they don't get enforced, but people look at them and say, this is a ridiculous speed limit, I'm going to ignore it, and then they improvise. And I'll tell you a real story of one, when you had the radar thing on South Street Extension. I was coming in from over in Franklin, and it was set up, I think, at Leffler Lane or someplace like that. And, I wasn't trying to get anywhere fast, I was just driving, but without thinking a whole lot about it, I think of that road by its construction, its setback, its sidewalks. That's a 35-mile-an-hour road. It's not. It's a 30-mile-an-hour road. And I found myself wondering, is this a 30-mile-an-hour road? Because somebody complained about it some years ago. Because when I hit, the light came on, I said, oh, you're going too fast. You're going 35. It's like, I'm going exactly what I think I should be going, except I was wrong. And I actually drove all the way back into Franklin. So where the heck did this change? Because I think it's a 30-mile-an-hour. And I went back, and sure enough, it's 40 miles an hour in Franklin. And there's a couple places that it's not, but it's basically a 40-mile-an-hour road there. And then as soon as you hit Medfield, it's 30. And I'm not making an argument to raise the speed on South Street Extension, but my point is, merely dropping the speed limit doesn't improve the situation, and in fact, it can make the situation worse. So.
No, I think if the town meeting doesn't end up adopting those articles, then we do have the existing safety committee, and there'll have to be a serious review of where is it most appropriate, and there may be some situations where it is appropriate to raise it, as you kind of look at it.
There are certain, one of the things that always breaks to my mind is if you come down Center Street in Dover, when you get by the Norfolk Hunt Club, there's a very steep hill there. If you take your foot off the gas pedal, by the time you hit the bottom of the hill, you're over the speed limit, and they put a police cruiser right at Hunt Drive to nab those cars and ticket them. So you could run into situations that, even a little incline can pull up the speed beyond 20 miles an hour, or 25 miles an hour, whatever, so.
Could I raise, this is slightly off topic, two safety questions. One was just the emails we'd exchanged about the parking space by the Unitarian Church right at the crosswalk, North Street. Have you had a chance to think at all about what, if anything?
Well, I mean, it'll definitely increase visibility for the pedestrians.
Yeah.
In the meantime, I think since then, it's been painted.
So you've eliminated one of,
No, we did not eliminate one. I think the question was, should we eliminate one?
yeah.
It'll definitely, and just for people at home, so they know what we're talking about, North Street by the, I was gonna say zebras, but the Nosh and Grog, the crosswalk, if you're coming down North Street towards Main Street, if there's a car parked in that first spot there, you really can't see a pedestrian that's trying to cross, so, it would certainly help the visibility if we eliminate the first spot. It probably wouldn't make the businesses too happy, but.
That's one I personally would, I mean, I drive that all the time, so after we had exchanged emails, I thought about it, because somebody had said, well, maybe you have to do two, and then I went, and it's like, no, you just need the one. That's all it takes. It's hard to see around that. The second safety issue has to do with the striping on North Street headed north out of the center where North Street and Harding split. When that road was, my wife brought this up to me one morning, and then immediately my neighbor brought the same thing up completely independently that same morning. What happened is when the road got restriped, the yellow stripe goes up, and as it approaches that T intercept, the fork, the striping, where it used to just go straight and then end, and then there was an intersection. What's happened is that the stripe, whoever was doing the striping, they actually continued the painting and made a 20, 30 degree of the turn toward North Street. What that does, because I argued with these guys, what's the safety issue? And then my neighbor came back and said, I'll tell you exactly what the safety issue is. There's people going north on North Street out of Medfield, wanting to go on Harding Street, not wanting to cross the yellow solid line. So what happens is they're going to make a left onto Harding, they're going to take the left fork. There's somebody coming off north at the stop sign waiting to see what they're going to do. And then because of that little curve, and all you have to do is take like 10 feet of that back off. Mm-hmm. But because of that little curve, the first move that the person at the stop sign sees is a car starting to turn right on North Street. And my neighbor said, somebody's going to get killed there, because somebody at a stop sign is going to say, oh, they're going up North Street, I can pull out. And then the person goes around the solid line and stays on Harding. So that was a change from what it used to be. First, I didn't believe it was a safety issue, and then.
And it was a change that wasn't made by us.
Yeah.
Just so you have a little background, the company that we're dealing with now to paint the lines, it was supposed to be a 3-night process to get everything done. It's turned into a 2-month process. They're still not done. So I'm having a lot of issues with them. There's not only that, there's several areas in town. I think at West and Adams, they did an overpaint, so it went into the intersection.
Okay, yeah.
Problems down at Nebo and Foundry. I brought this to their attention. I'm waiting for them to fix it, all these issues. And they still have areas of town they haven't painted, so I would.
Well, that's one you can add to the list, because I actually think it's legitimately a safety issue.
And I would safe to say that we probably shouldn't use this company next year. Yeah. So.
On that note, when you do a line painting on a main street like North Street is the main road going through. So Harding Street is the turn left. So usually what they do is they leave that space open, like you said. They would leave that space open so they could take that turn, and it's a little safer. But no matter what company
I'm not sure that North Street's the main street. The name changes, but the main traffic usually goes straight, not up north.
Right.
So, yeah.
So they would usually leave that yellow line off at that intersection to let them turn, or make it a dash line or something to designate there's a turn there.
If it was simply painted back black to where up to the point where the line is straight.
Right.
And get rid of that curly Q turn at the very top. That's all it takes.
But I think what's going to happen is there's not that many line companies out there that, there's, especially during the time of season where you try to get the line painting done. What happens is everybody's looking for the same amount of time from them to get the line painting done. They all make mistakes. They all aren't going to be perfect. And no matter what company we use. I mean, I've used 10 companies over the years, and they all are the same. Sometimes they give you a great job. It all depends on the day. It all depends on, you know, what crew you have. And so it's a difficult process, but I agree, this time they kind of dropped the ball a little bit.
Because we had a big problem with the last company too, didn't they?
Yeah.
Go out of business?
They go out of
Right.
business.
Their lines were a little,
That was,
That's right. 27, like
that was 2 companies ago.
That's a traffic calming strategy.
Not sure what they were going for.
So when we had the traffic engineers studying the Medfield State Hospital development, they recommended that both the intersections at Hospital and Harding and North be turned into Ts, because that's a much safer design to have than those forks. I think we have forks, or just because that's the way the cows went 100 years ago, before there were cars, and so.
It is easy to control, it's traffic calming, things like that, so, to tee it
Although
up.
you
Have a
have to be
T.
careful if you made West Street into North, or Harding into North, I guess it is, a right angle, you could back up the traffic down to West Street, down to North Meadows Road, because those cars, it's like a regular turning motion, and if they all have to stop and take a right-hand turn, you're going to get a big backup on West Street. So you have to look at things like that, too, so.
You know, as a practical matter, Pete, once we get the hospital developed and maybe even the Larkin project, I can't imagine us doing anything other than a T intersection between Hospital and Harding. I don't know what else you could do there. There's not
Oh, I
any-
agree,
there's
yeah,
not any
yeah,
room.
that's a dangerous intersection.
Yeah.
But I think Harding and North is a dangerous intersection, too. I would,
Although, do we have a lot of accidents there?
Which
Harding and North?
Not recently, no.
Yeah. That one, I mean, you have to pay attention, but that one I don't.
oh,
haven't
yeah,
seen
yeah, I
much.
mean, to be coming down North Street and be faced with a stop sign is not an intuitive sort of traffic issue.
There's also a certain percentage of the people who drive that route who don't think you're taking a left onto West Street.
Mhm.
And they just sort of think they're going straight. And then they have the right of way right through the intersection. It's kind of just zipping right through without realizing they're supposed to yield to the people coming up Harding.
Maybe we need a rotary. We don't have a.
Anything else on traffic enforcement? Okay, Election Day police coverage.
What would you like to know?
Well, I'd like to know if we're gonna have it. As I spoke with the town clerk about this, and she's requested police coverage. I know Mike.
I did ask the town clerk after we spoke,
Yeah.
and she said on Election Day, they have a policeman there from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m.
Yeah. They didn't have it on the primary day, and she had requested one.
Well, you don't really need it on the primary in the morning.
Well, I mean, there's two issues, right? There's the security issue, and then there's the second issue, which is we should get Mark Sorrell to weigh in on it as well, in terms of typically there's two people who open the boxes, and usually one of them is a police officer.
So the law says that you should either have a police officer or a constable present. She did make a request for the primary to have a police officer. I was informed at 10 o'clock that morning that there was no officer because they couldn't fill it. And then I looked to see if we had other details where I could pull somebody, and we didn't. We did have an officer there at 3 o'clock until close. I know that the town clerk, I mean, for the letter of the law, we met the letter of the law. She's a constable. It's not the ideal situation. We did meet the letter of the law. We didn't have anybody to put there at the time.
Okay. Will that be rectified for Election Day in November?
Sure.
Or
I
what
mean,
do we need to do to have it be rectified for Election Day in November?
I will pull somebody from the shift if I have to.
Could I understand, what's the role of that person? Only because you talked about there was no officer there for the morning of the primary, and you brought up when you open the ballot box. So to me, it's two different.
Basically to preserve order and
Yeah.
protect the ballots.
The
So
state
it's
law says.
Ballot security.
Yeah, it
Okay.
says preserve order and protect the election officers and supervisors from any interference with their duties and aid in enforcing the laws related to the election.
One of the things that they are supposed to look at is making sure that people stay people carrying signs and soliciting votes
okay.
stay 300 feet from the polling place.
Yeah, okay.
And usually everybody does that anyway. They stay out by Ice House Road at the entrance there.
It'll be taken care of.
Great. I will let Carol know.
She did make the request, just so you know.
And she contacted me as well. So, anything else, Chief? that we need to talk
I don't
about?
have anything, if you
I
have
had a
anything for
couple
me.
more things. I've always wondered about the police officer on the detail at the transfer station. Do you think that's still necessary? I've often thought that we could have a less expensive solution to that.
I would probably defer to Maurice on that.
As far as the transfer station, the only thing is, I mean, we contemplated on using our DPW personnel there. There are a lot of times where there's some, people get a little irate, and I think it's very easy not to listen to one of our DPW employees rather than a police officer that has a little more authority. We were looking at, I think especially on Saturdays, I think you do still need a police officer there. Possibly on a Wednesday or a Friday, we could get away with, but it's just we don't have the extra personnel during the week trying to get projects done. I mean, we could pull somebody off, but it's just an extra body down there that be difficult for us. But I think Saturdays definitely we should have at least a one police officer there. I asked for, if we could get maybe Wednesday and Friday at times, just so that people don't take advantage of knowing that there's nobody there on a Wednesday or a Friday. So once in a while we get an officer there just to shake it up a little bit.
Okay. The other thing I was going to ask about is the parking in the downtown, specifically on that little street that runs down by Thomas Upham Road. Chief Meany had talked about some solutions for that, to maybe create some parking there, to widen it or something, especially near the park. I noticed on Medfield Day that one of the wooden pieces that is to set off the park had fallen down, and that sort of reminded me of the fact that Chief Meany was talking about pushing that over, I think, to create some parking in that area.
And it would certainly help. I think a lot of those folks that park down there during the week are probably employees of either the Thomas Upham House or one of the, so it would certainly help if we could do something like that.
But there's no current plans to do anything?
Not that I'm aware of. I was
Yeah,
not
okay, all
aware of
right.
anything.
Been looking at it, have you, Mo? Okay.
And it sounds like a good idea.
My understanding is Upham House tried to make an arrangement with CVS to use some of the back parking spaces for their employees, and CVS said no. That's somewhat anecdotal. I could be wrong on that, but that's what I was told.
It's a shame, too, because a lot of that parking lot's not really used.
Yeah, right.
That would have been a good solution.
Thank you. That's anything else? Chief, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Chief Carrico, you're up.
I hear things are going better. You sold your house.
I did sell my house.
Right.
I'm homeless right now, living in Plymouth, though.
You're getting closer.
I'm getting closer. A couple more weeks, I'll be 20 minutes out. I come before you tonight. I have 3 documents that need signatures. I have an ambulance service affiliation agreement. The ambulance service affiliation agreement is basically an agreement that's required by state statute for a BLS ambulance service. So what it does is the hospital provides medical oversight for our service. And within this, as we become ALS, there's 2 other components that we need to have also completed, which is a QA/QI program and the Medical Services Medical Direction Service Agreement. So what happens is, as an ALS ambulance service, we work under the medical control doctor's license. So we need to have an agreement with that doctor. It's Dr. Michael Valkanis. And with it comes a $10,000 charge that is basically to cover his fees and everything that he needs to do for us. He acts as our representative if there's an issue. If we have a problem with one of our paramedics or EMTs, we go before him, he can review it, and then he can also send that information up to OEMS. The QA/QI component is pretty critical, and it's especially used for self-improvement. So every medical report that's completed by our EMS staff has to be reviewed by our EMS officer, Lieutenant Benatti. And what he does is he takes that information and then he criticizes it, and then if there's something that's a blatant violation of the state OEMS protocols, then we bring that firefighter in and we have a corrective action. If it's bad enough to go before the medical control doctor, then we have to submit a corrective action to OEMS, so there's a whole process that happens. So what it does is it really gives us an avenue to self-correct and improve. Like I said, as we become ALS, let me back up. If we were just a BLS service, I would just need the affiliation agreement. But as we are going ALS, I need these two other documents signed. And one of the other things that I need those three agreements is for the ALS license. The ALS license has 11 components. I'm about halfway through. Once I get these documents signed, I can take them, add that to it, and send them off to the hospital also. I'm here for your questions.
Pete?
Should we have had this affiliation agreement before now then for our BLS service?
We did have one. Now, one of the things that I've encountered in the past is that some fire chiefs have taken upon themselves to assign these agreements. And I've seen that at a whole bunch of chiefs meetings. And myself, I cannot enter into agreement as the fire chief, only the Board of Selectmen can. So I'm not going to do something I'm not supposed to, and I have the agreements for you to sign and review.
Oh, okay.
I did send them over to Mr. Sorrell. He did mark them up with some comments, and they were sent back to the hospital. When they returned from the hospital with the comments, they were resent to Mr. Sorrell, and then he said I should send them over to Maya for Maya's comments. And one of the things we did discover is that the Norwell Hospital's insurance requirements exceeded what we had. And then I did negotiate with the hospital, and they lowered those requirements, so we're in line. And there was some language in here that had to do with Catholic Catholic issues, I guess you'd say, and as far as birth control, which has nothing to do with our license or nothing to do. It's basically, they're stating that if somebody got transported to the hospital and they wanted to have an abortion, they couldn't have it at Norwood Hospital. So that's basically, it's just information. It's part of the agreement, but
That's odd to me that Norwood Hospital still has that, where,
yeah, they're still owned, and it still says that they're part of the Catholic hospital, so.
That was part of the transaction when they sold it.
oh, they committed to continuing on the,
Yeah, exactly.
interesting.
And there is some things in the back of the affiliation agreement. If you go to the page 12 of 14, there's some things there that I'll have to check off because it's additional duties as of an EMT. And then as you run through these, there's some things here that don't apply to us. And I could take you to the last item, which is paramedic only, acetaminophen IV. And what that is if somebody comes to me and says, I am a prior IV drug user and I do not want any type of morphine or anything like that, then what we do is we have an IV Tylenol that we can give them. So it's an alternative to people that don't want anything that they could be addicted to. So I can check off the areas that will apply to us.
I just have a general question as to how the ALS service startup is going in general.
We're going pretty good. We have the application that we're putting together. I'm in the process of hiring. We have now hired the replacement for one of the firefighters that left, so we're back up to 8 full-time staff. That replacement was a paramedic. I'm waiting for the
Are we
next.
at 3 paramedics now?
Myself, Lieutenant Benatti, and then Brian Sarrett. We are the 3 paramedics right now. And I have 3 more that will be coming on before the end of the year. 2 of them are having some trouble with the physical agility test. They're just having a little trouble passing that, so I hope that is completed by the end of the month, and then you'll probably see them coming on in October. I need to have the people on board because they need to be put on my application, because then they count towards paramedics towards going ALS. I'm hoping to get them pretty soon, so.
Yep, hopefully, good. Thank you.
On that particular point, Chief, I was reading, I might have been in the Beacon, but under the new law that says firefighters are considered, any cancer is considered job-related, but there are additional pre-employment requirements for physical, I don't know what's preconditions or
Yeah, there's
whatever.
an NFPA physical, and we do follow the hiring requirements for the state of Mass. So any firefighter that's brought on board is given a pre-employment physical. It's an extensive physical in accordance with that NFPA standard. And the cancer law is that if a firefighter were to develop cancer in the first 5 years, I believe that it says it would not be covered. But once he hits the 5-year mark and beyond, then it's presumed that any type of cancer that a firefighter gets would be job-related. I've seen some stats that we are 400 times more likely to get bladder cancer. I had a firefighter in Sandwich that developed colon cancer. There's a whole bunch of different things that people can get based on the exposures that we have. And that's why it's imperative that we wear self-contained breathing apparatus, we clean the fire gear, we wear hoods when we go into fires. We try to limit the exposure to our open skin, and then we clean our gear when we're all done, because we bring that stuff back to the fire station and then track it through, and then some guys go home and track it into their houses, so.
Okay, and you gave the answer on the 3 documents you need to sign. You said the ambulance service medical director is $10,000 a year.
Yes.
The other 2, are there any costs associated
No,
with?
that is the only cost that we will have, is $10,000 for medical control.
Okay.
And that's billed monthly, I believe, if the way it's stated in the document.
Okay, and the hiring situation, we, at town meeting, authorized an override of $250,000, which was added to your budget. Will that be sufficient to get us through June 30th?
Well, one of the things I did is when I looked at the budget, accounting for the $250,000, I wasn't going to bring firefighters on board and then overspend that amount of money. By holding off and hiring people as late as I can, there is a little bit of a savings there. And I'm hoping to use some of that excess funds to try to go for some ALS equipment. I've applied for the Firehouse Subs grant, and I applied for a LifePak 15, the cardiac monitor. I'm negotiating with the Yarmouth Fire Department. I heard that they had a 6th LifePak 15 cardiac monitor that they're trying to get rid of. I tried to do a little bit of Monty Hall and make a deal with them. But I'm waiting for him to get back to me, because I was hoping to get it at a reduced rate, which would be about half of what the cost of a brand-new one would be.
Good luck.
Well, we'll see what happens. I know him too, so hopefully I can, we'll be able to cut a deal somehow. But there are a couple of other monitors out there that we can purchase that have been certified in lieu of spending $35,000 for a brand-new one. And we should be okay. It's just a matter of getting the application in line, and the way it works is once you get this application in line and you get your pharmacy license and you have all this information, I have to be ready to go at a moment's notice if the state comes down and does the inspection, because all the equipment has to be in place. I have 32 SOGs that are EMS related that we'll put together. A lot of it's working on the information that was completed by Lieutenant Bernardi. So we're in good shape. The one last piece that I'm waiting for is these signatures, and I have to do some mutual aid agreements on the other departments around us who provide ALS. One of the requirements is that Dr. Valkanis may require us to have 30 patient contacts with each one of our paramedics if they have no experience. So basically, we have an ALS run. We go out, we start treating, we call in another paramedic from another agency, and he basically sits there and says, yes, you're doing it right, or no, you're not doing it right.
And then he's paid by us.
Yeah, that's part of the agreement. We can either pay him $200 for each intercept. I know that Norfolk Fire has offered to send that person, and we didn't discuss any payment, so I'm hoping that maybe he'll, just provide that service, but some of the people that we're hiring, I have one, Brian Surratt, has 14 years of experience. I have another firefighter that has 20 years of experience. So my hope is when they meet with Dr. Valkanis, is that he will have enough confidence in their abilities that we can actually be our own preceptors. So that's a good thing for us, because then we can use our own people and we don't have to worry about an outside agency.
Now, the new ALS firefighters you're hiring, are any of them replacements or are they all additional?
Well, the one person was a replacement, that was Brian Surratt, so that brought us back up to 8. And now the others that are coming in will be that third firefighter on the shift,
Okay.
which will give us a paramedic. And one of the things that I'm trying to do is cost control, and obviously that if we have a lot of time off in the books, and we'll maintain a paramedic on duty, but if we'll drop down the 2 people on duty if we have to, just to make the budget work.
Chief, did we have a paramedic that left?
We did have a paramedic that left.
Okay.
He chose to to leave the department.
Yeah.
So you think we'll probably be okay living with the 250,000 override amount?
250, I had gone and did an estimate, and I was around 287,000 is what I needed for a full year just on salaries. Now, what I do is when I put my budgets together, I go through and do an Excel spreadsheet for each item that I would need: vacation time, sick time, the stipends, all that information. So I'll set it up and present that to the warrant committee or to you, and we can review it. I try to account for every dollar that I would spend, and it's tough trying to forecast the amount of calls that we're going to do and the amount of box alarms that we have. And a box alarm today, we had a couple of them, we got 8 people back. Some days you'll get 8, sometimes you'll get 5. And then the amount and frequency of calls that come in. We had 2 box alarms just the afternoon due to the weather. A couple of lightning strikes, fire alarms that had gone off. If I could predict the number of calls and how they come in, I'd be making millions of dollars, and I wouldn't be a fire chief. But, we try to manage, and we try to do it as efficiently as possible, and be fiscally responsible. And, it's...
One final question, then I'll shut up. The warrant committee wants me to prepare a tax rate estimate for fiscal '20. Can you give me what you anticipate the additional cost of having the ALS service will be on your budget for next year?
As far as what my total cost will be?
For the ALS.
Okay, I'd have to go and figure out what that would be and
Okay.
present you with a number. If you were looking for something right here, and I'd be struggling to get something that would be accurate.
Well, yeah, sure, I understand you need time to figure that out. It's very complicated, and it depends on whether, you're gonna be hiring 3 instead of 4 full-time, because you've got 1 replacement, and there's a lot of other factors. But what I'm interested in knowing is, the biggest component of the town's appropriation, probably over 90%, is the operating budget.
Mhm.
So I have to give them a figure on the operating budget, so I need to know ballpark figure how much going full-time ALS will add to the operating budget. So over and above your existing fire department, but your regular fire department was operated with an EMS.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. That's it. That's enough.
No, here for you.
Just one.
Yeah,
I imagine Gus has
I had one I had one question, but Mike has added another question. So the first question I have is kind of administrative. I understand the point you made is that actually you're saying you legally can't sign these contracts.
No, they're agreements, and
So
my
the-
understanding is only the Board of Selectmen can enter into agreement.
So so the one that caught my eye was the second one, the QAQI.
Yep.
And and Mike, you're the one, I think, signing it as the chair of the Board of Selectmen, but it says an acknowledgement of this plan, its components, I, as the authorized signatory of, I guess it's for Medfield, do hereby agree to comply by this plan and hold all providers who will be covered by this plan accountable under it. When I read that statement, that sounds more like a statement from a fire chief about how you're gonna run the plan than from the chair of the Board of Selectmen, who's gonna make sure that you run the plan the right way. So this is the only one that caught my attention. The other two, it's like, yeah, I get it, it's contract. This one sounded to me like it should be the fire chief that's committing to this.
Would it be better to authorize you to sign it? But you
That-
do need authorization from the selectmen to sign it.
I'm going to be the one to enforce that.
That was my
agreement.
point, yeah.
So if you choose for me to sign that, I would be more than happy to sign it.
Okay.
So that
That
make
was,
more-
then I would
that
make
might
that
make more sense
suggestion
for
at the
him.
very least for that one contract that we authorize you to sign, only because of the way it's worded.
Yep.
Now, my second question is probably gonna go more at Mike. And it's
Sorry
gonna
about
be
that.
it's gonna be
Got me
the,
out there.
well, you started it, Mike, so. So I'm gonna so first off, I'm gonna ask you for something, and I'm also gonna offer you something, and I'm going back to the ALS Study Committee. The answer to Mike's question should be $400,000. With an assumption of $150,000 in increased ALS revenues to include what doesn't go out net to the towns that are supporting us. So the short answer to your question, based on everything that the study committee and I and everybody presented to the taxpayers, that's the answer. But of the $250,000 that was the override for the second time, $60,000 of that went to the town and school employee budget, not to the fire department. And then the other $20,000 should have actually gone to increased OPEB funding, but that's not a budget. So this came up a few months ago, and I said, wait a minute. If you guys are telling me that the town and school employee benefits budget is just fine, and $250,000 can go to the fire department, I'm fine with that. But I'm doing the accounting side of this, that there was a $60,000 chunk of change that was supposed to go into the town and school employee budget. And the reason I'm doing it isn't really to be a stickler around budgets, but we said this was the thing that we wanted to do that would drive the discipline in this town to recognize the full cost of what it costs to hire somebody. So the very first group of people we hire, 6 months later, we can't remember that 60,000 of that was the town and school employee budget. And the other, 20,000 more should have been for the other piece. Now that, just so you know, that doesn't mean that you only have whatever's left of the 250 coming from the override, because the whole understanding was, as the fire department budget increased above that override amount, the ALS, we would have to approve an increase in the fire budget, but it would be offset by a certain amount of increased revenue coming in from the ALS. So if Mike's asking you for the budget, what your cost are, he should also be asking you for what your projection on the added ALS revenue will be,
You're
because
right.
that's the other piece of it.
Mike, $400,000.
And on the revenue side?
And I realize you inherited all of this advanced thinking that we did before you got here. But my main purpose for this is, we said we wanted to do something, and I want us to do it, which is to recognize the full cost of labor and drive it into our thinking. So I'm actually being more of a nudge around how we're throwing 250,000 around and stuff like that. I'm probably talking mostly to Mike and Christine on this one probably, and Joy if she was here.
But just as I understand it though, Gus, it's 60 of the 400, right? I mean, if you think about it, I mean, allocated between the additional revenue.
The way, yeah, that's fair. Yeah, it would have been, out of the 250, it would have been, you're right. It would have been 30 and 10, I think.
Yeah.
So you would have still been something like 210 or something like that.
And that's for things like health insurance, OPEB, liability insurance, all those.
The OPEB is all a function of how disciplined we choose to be, because it's not actually an operating budget item. It's just a long-term obligation. But with the policy that we've set, in the next budget, we're going to take care of that. So we're not paying for it this year, but we'll be paying for it next year. So if there's anything I can give you, you may already have it, but if there's anything I can give you in the upfront analysis, and this was actually Brendan McNiff who was the one who really worked that out. Not to say you have to live with it, it's just if you want to know how we got to where we got that information.
I believe I have that
I think you
information.
have it. If it's hard to, if it's confusing or anything, let me know and I'll be happy to. It took me 8 months, but I finally got to where I understood it, so.
But if Gus pulls out one of his charts, then you'll be really
No.
confused.
Okay, point made.
So I had one more question.
Hopefully for Chief Carrick.
Yes. I'm looking to
I don't
use
think
the
I have any
chair
answers for you, Peter.
to let you,
Yeah, no, go
Are
ahead.
you sure you want to close on that house?
so through the serendipity of our getting minutes of your interview with us back when you were getting appointed, I was reading about your proposal, or what you did in the other towns in Sandwich of reaching out to the high school kids.
Yep.
And I remember at the time that really appealed to me, and reading the minutes today reminded me of that. And so that's in my mind. Is that something we're still going to see here?
Yeah, that's still in the long-range plan.
Great.
It's absolutely going to happen. One of the things is I did reach out to the superintendent. Back when I was in Duxbury, I had a program for kids going off to school, kids going into four-year colleges. It was a dorm safety program. I want to say Duxbury had like a 94% college entrance rate, but there was no fire prevention that was given to these kids when they went off and they stayed at like a dormitory facilities or off-school housing. And a lot of times there are some significant fires that happen due to the lack of fire protection, smoke detectors. So what I did offer to him is to reinvigorate that program, and maybe right before the seniors depart for the year, is just having a little half-hour fire prevention talk with them, talking about dorm fire safety and some of the things that they can do when they do arrive at college, and some of the things that the parents can do when they arrive to look at schools. There were some significant fires that happened in dormitories where some students got killed. So it's rather important to me, and there's been some big papers that have been written at the National Fire Academy on that subject. So
The other thing that I, as an attorney, know is that the kids going off to college are adults usually, because they've just turned 18, and probably most of them do not have healthcare proxies, so that if they get into medical issues, they really should probably all have healthcare proxies where they're suggesting that whoever it is, their parents or whomever, should be able to make healthcare decisions for them. Parents are just used to doing that up until that point in time, and it ends. So you can add that to your
I'll put that on.
college list.
Anything else, Doug?
No. Ready for
All
a
right,
motion?
yeah, let's see, we need a motion to authorize me to sign the ambulance service affiliation agreement and the ambulance services medical director services, and authorize the chief to sign the committee QI. Is
right.
that what you want?
yes, sir.
So I move that we authorize the chairman of the Board of Selectmen to sign the ambulance service affiliation agreement and the ambulance services medical director services agreement, and that we authorize Chief Carrico to sign the emergency medical services QA/QI program with Stewart.
Second.
All in favor?
Yep.
Aye. Chief, thank you.
Thank you.
Steve.
Oh, I'm sorry.
May I ask a question of the chief?
Yes, you may. You're not done yet, chief. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Gotta get the microphone. Gotta save it for posterity.
Based on your prevention that you were doing for college students, I personally live in a very old building that's a condo, and we have so many more multi-level or floor buildings going up in town. Is there any kind of fire prevention program for each of these buildings to have the fire department come in and say, this is how you exit, or what, anything like that?
Yeah, we can actually do that. What we try to do is we try to get into every building once a year to do an inspection. Buildings that have common entrances, I believe, are supposed to be inspected by the building inspector's office every 5 years. But what we'll do is we can come in and we can look at the existing fire alarm systems, the smoke detectors, emergency lights, and we can conduct an inspection. That's one of the things that Lieutenant Harmon actually has on his schedule, is to start getting into a lot of the buildings that we have in town. And you at least want to get in there once a year. It's to be familiar with the layout, the design, check exits, make sure nothing's accumulating in spaces in the stairways. And you know, it's rather important. It's kind of tough when you have 2 or 3 people on duty on a full-time basis and running calls. So you get a little creative with your time and how you do things. But there is some programs. If you had an issue where you were a little curious or concerned about your current conditions, obviously if you call us, we'll come out and we'll conduct an inspection. People have to remember that smoke detectors are only good for 10 years. CO detectors are good 5 to 7 years, and a lot of times it's based on manufacturer's recommendations, which may be a little more or a little less. And that's one of the biggest things that we find when we conduct resale inspections, because every residential property has to be inspected upon sale. And we go in and I can't just go up to your house and say, hey, I want to do an inspection in your house if you're a private resident. If you invite me in to do a CO smoke investigation, then if I find something else that is a code violation, then I'm obligated by law to mention it to you. And if it's significant enough, I can even hold up the sale of your property until that safety issue is remedied. So there are some things that we need to do. We need to get out there and get into the public more and do some of these multifamily units. Once again, if you have a common entrance, if you have single entrances in one big like condominium type block, then it's a little more dicey for me. I can't really come in and do inspections, but common entrances I can.
Thank you, great.
One thing you ought to be aware of, the state just came out with a revised rail transport plan. It's online through the Department of Transportation. And this line that goes through Medfield Center is indicated as one of the lines that has a potential upgrade. And if you notice the past few years, in addition to Mr. Kraft's plans for the MBTA to run rail service, particularly from Walpole to Foxborough, there is they are, I believe, intending to upgrade the speeds. They'd like to get them up to 30 miles an hour. Now, I don't see how they could do that in Medfield with 7 grade crossings, but we are not allowed by federal law to know what's in the trains that go through Medfield. The only way you can do it, there's a booklet that's published with what the symbols on the side of the cars are. So you'd have to sit there and figure out, this car has that symbol, it contains that, that car has that symbol. We cannot ask the railroads, or we can ask, but they'll say, you're not allowed that information by federal law.
Every fire truck that we have, and I believe every cruiser, has an emergency response guide. And in that emergency response guide, it actually has what all those symbols mean. And it's a quick reference guide that we can, so if we had a problem, say if we had smoke coming from one of those gondolas or one of those cars, we could look at what the placarding is on the outside and hopefully try to identify what's inside. There is a manifest that's kept with the train, which is another way that we can get information also. But we do have those emergency response guides.
Anything else for the chief? Great, thank you.
All right, Steve.
Thanks.
Well, we have a request from Maurice Goulet to vote to authorize the town administrator to sign a notice of intent for the new Phase 2 Stormwater MS4 general permit.
So this notice of intent is to comply with the MS4 stormwater permit. It's actually the 2016 permit that just became effective July 1st of 2018. And this notice of intent is required by EPA by October 1st. That's why we're here tonight. But basically, the notice of intent is just to show our intent of what we're going to be doing to comply with the stormwater permit. It deals with best management practices, illicit discharge elimination. We have different requirements that we have to come by, and it's by fiscal year. So this notice of intent is just to give them an idea of what we're planning to do, public outreach, education, things like that. So
This basically is another mandate imposed by the big spenders in Washington on cities and towns, and will cost some cities and towns, it's going to cost a lot of money. Fortunately, I think over the years we have incorporated a lot of things. We have our systems on our drainage systems on GIS.
all our outfalls and everything run GIS.
Yeah, we have a stormwater management bylaw. We sweep our streets constantly. You're required to do once a year under this mandate. These guys in Washington sit there and impose cost after cost after cost on local government. And then the taxpayers say, why are the taxes going up? Well, they're going up because of the phonies in Washington of both political persuasions are sending costs down to the local level without paying for it. And what they do is they come in and they threaten you, they fine you, they prosecute you, all so that they can look like they're doing something. But
we are ahead of the curve right now. All our outfalls are mapped. One of the things that they want us to do this year is the outfalls. We've already done that. EPA has already reviewed this notice of intent through the Neponset Stormwater Partnership. So we're in really, really good shape, but we do have to have this requirement for EPA by October 1st.
That's
Well,
why
a lot
they-
of the towns that we talk to say that they're spending huge amounts of money to have to comply with this.
Right.
Ken Feeney said that we weren't going to have to spend much of any
Well,
money
we've
because
been-
we were already pretty good.
We've been doing a lot of the work ourselves, so there's a lot of consulting that goes out. Right now, we probably spend about $20,000, which I'm going to have a contract for you for the next meeting to sign for our consultant to keep going with our stormwater management. There are going to be requirements that we're going to have to do a lot of sampling at our outfalls for wet times and dry times. That's going to be a burden on us. Our street sweeping, our catch basin cleaning, all that, it goes part of it as well. We do a lot with this Neponset Stormwater Partnership for public outreach and education, so we're on good tracks. It's just there may be some other costs in the future depending on.
Nothing like these other towns that are spending hundreds of thousands to millions to comply.
I think that because they're behind the curve, they don't have the GIS system set up, they don't have the mapping done, they don't have the
Okay,
personnel
good.
to help move further. So we're in good shape right now. Like I said, we're ahead of the curve, but there may be some costs incurred in the future. We may have to think about development and charging stormwater fees depending on how deep it gets for us.
Yes, you're allowed to do that now, too. Many towns have, I believe Millis, I think, has done it.
Either Millis or Medway, because I know when we went to the six-town meeting, they were talking about imposing those, they charge by the amount of impervious surface you have in your property.
And many of them charge it quarterly. It's like $75 a quarter. It's quite a large expense for the homeowner that unexpected
Well,
they're
and
getting
it sounded
these.
to me like they were charging those fees to do to pay for this stuff that we've already done apparently, so
Right.
that, I guess we're in good shape.
We have more to do. I'm not saying we're perfect, but we're in good shape right
Yeah,
now.
well, it's good that we don't have to be charging those fees.
As I recall, they said that the most painful part of that was the commercial, because they're doing impervious surface, so, you know, Shaw's has a parking lot, and
Originally, it was supposed to
Really?
apply, I think, you correct me if I'm wrong on this, to developments over 4 acres. Now I understand there's an effort to make it anything over an acre.
I thought that some of those towns were doing residential, weren't they? Or not?
well, I remembered, as they said, but where the real pain was coming in, because if, we'll charge you for your driveway versus we'll charge you for a full supermarket parking. So relatively speaking, the big charges were hitting businesses.
The contract I'll be giving you next meeting, we do have in our budget already earmarked for stormwater management. So.
And the object of all of this is to keep the stormwater out of the river, out of the.
It's to make sure that stormwater stays clean. If there's any kind of, people illegally tapping into our drainage system, pumping out their basements, we don't know what kind of things they have in their basement, whether it's, fuels or chemicals that could get into our system. We have to, make sure that everything is not, like in the old days, oil and chemicals used to be poured down the catch basins just to get rid of it. So hopefully that doesn't happen anymore, but we're pretty diligent about sampling everything now and making sure that we have clean stormwater.
And basically what they want you to do is retain the water from a 100-year storm on your own site and discharge that slowly into the ground rather than putting it a drain to the town's drainage system.
Anything else from Rob? Do we have a motion?
I move that we authorize the town administrator to sign the notice of intent for the new Phase 2 Stormwater MS4 general permit.
Second.
All in favor?
Yep.
All right. Assistant Town Administrator Christine Trua, was there a question? Oh, well. Request us
Thanks,
to
Mom.
authorize me to sign the DHCD eligible purchaser certificate for 9 Thomas Clues Road in Allendale. This was the result of the lottery.
Yes, the lottery, and they actually closed about 3 weeks ago. But one of the items that needs to be recorded is the eligible purchaser certificate, which says that we agree to the new deed rider, which DACD supplied to us and they've signed off on, so I would ask you to sign it.
Boy, that would really screw up the closing if we didn't.
Well, they were able to close without it, but they have to record it as soon as possible, so we didn't hold up their closing for this. DHCD unfortunately didn't get it to the closing attorneys until the day of the closing, so normally we have it in advance of the closing.
Yeah, they came in 4 hours before the closing and wanted us to sign verifying documents we had never seen, and we refused to sign it. And so their lawyer contacted the state, and the state, well, you don't have to have that in for the closing, you can submit it later on.
And just so everybody knows, the house at Allendale sold for $290,800.
That's an affordable price. Excellent.
So I was fine with this, I just had questions on background
Oh, sure.
because of things I didn't know. The Medfield Community Development Corporation, is that under the auspices of the Affordable Housing Trust?
No.
Well, I don't want to step on my selectman report. It will be shortly. So historically, the CDC, the board of directors of the CDC has been the Affordable Housing Committee. As part of our committee reorganization, we're
Okay.
getting, it's going to become, certain members of the Affordable Housing Trust Board will also be directors of the CDC.
Okay.
So, but just their mention in here is because they were the original owners of the property and sold it to Ronald and Joanne Miller, who are then selling it to the new buyer.
So that was my other question about background. So what we basically have is somebody who bought an affordable house, wants to sell it, again, keeping it affordable. That's what this thing is basically verifying.
Yep.
Then the only other question I have is what's the 2.7 resale multiplier? What does that
So
mean?
when they resell it, there's a formula which takes into account the resale multiplier as well as what their appraisal
What
is.
is a resale multiplier? I don't, is that like a factor that you look at the market value of a house, divide it by the retail multiplier, and that gets you the affordable housing price? Got it, okay.
Except there's one other little addendum to that, is we then take that amount for the resale and we have to send it to DHCD and they determine whether or not that is actually affordable. And if it is not,
Okay.
then they are allowed to adjust it down to what would be affordable.
Wow. Okay, that's all I wanted to
Yeah.
know. I'm okay with it.
We have a motion.
I move that we authorize Chairman Marcucci to sign the DHCD eligible purchaser certificate for 9 Thomas Clues Road.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Yes.
All right, that is done. All right, we have a request to appoint Jared Spinelli as an associate member of the Zoning Board of Appeals. He's been reviewed by the ZBA, and they're recommending his appointment. Any comments or questions about Mr. Spinelli?
Fine with it.
We have a motion.
I move that we appoint Jared Spinelli as an associate member of the Zoning Board of Appeals.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
And we have a request to appoint Randy Carg to the Board of Water and Sewerage. That's been vacant for a few months, and so I was pleased to see that Randy was interested in doing this. So any questions, comments about Randy? Do we have a motion?
I move that we appoint Randy Carg as a member of the Board of Water and Sewerage.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Can I add one more on appointments? And this is my screw up, that I did not pass this out to you 2 meetings ago. So at the last meeting, you reappointed Chris Caldy to the Wildlife Committee, but in Chris's email to me, not only did she ask to be put back on the committee, I'm hoping I can do this, even though it's more administrative cleanup here.
Mark's not here.
Mark's not here, that was what I meant. She said that in addition to her going back on, that Nancy Schemer should come off. And the reason for that was that Nancy Schemer was involved in the Lyme disease education, not the wildlife management so much, but the Lyme disease education. So we can defer this if you want to, but one further action we should have on the Wildlife Committee is to drop Nancy Schemer as a member.
I think that's fine. You can accept their resignation.
Did we reappoint her when we?
I think we did.
Yeah, we
I'd have to
yeah.
go back and look, but I think we did.
Yeah, I think we did.
Yeah, I think
Got
you
an
can
email
accept.
from Nancy resigning?
We do not have an official notification
so
from
I'll-
her
I'll
resigning.
get
So
back
if you
to
just have
Chris,
Chris send
yeah.
it.
Well, I mean, we could just remove her as well. I just
Yeah.
want to make sure, I just want to make sure there's no wires crossed here. Nancy's not going to be disappointed to learn she's not in the
Well, and I'm trusting that Chris wasn't going to disappoint Nancy by telling
No, I
her to
don't,
do
think-
something.
I doubt
I
it.
think,
But you
yeah,
just-
so I don't think it's an issue, but if you want, I'll double check that with, and ask Nancy to send, or,
Yeah. Whatever.
okay.
Just wanna make
I will,
sure.
I'll ask Chris to ask Nancy to send us an email confirming that she wishes to step off, that's fine.
All right. Special town meeting proposed for October 22nd, 2018, preliminary draft of articles in the folder. don't
Points, I'm out of town that entire week, so
we
if
should
it's
probably pick a different.
would
Okay, wait, oh.
be good if we could pick a different
That's
date.
fine. Can I just talk about one thing that we missed under discussion items? And this relates to the special town meeting, is that I've been meeting with the town moderator, and we've been talking about a potential date change for the annual town meeting.
Okay.
And he would like to include that on the special town meeting if you are in favor of doing that. And one of the reasons he's been thinking about this for a few years now, and really considering over the last 6 months, is that we normally run into the annual town meeting being the Monday after April vacation, after school vacation. And it's really hard to do any education running up to town meeting with that vacation. We were lucky it didn't happen this year, but looking at the calendar, it will happen for next year. He would propose that we move the annual town meeting to the first Monday in May, and that if it's continued, that it be the first Tuesday in May, so that it's within the bylaw, but that's how he would like to have it.
And that would require a town meeting vote and then a vote.
And then it would go at the election.
Okay.
Yeah, so similar to the town clerk item. The other thing we've been talking
And
about
say that
is,
again, Chris. So first Monday of May, and then if it's a second day,
it'd be the first Tuesday in May.
oh, first Tuesday,
Yes.
okay.
I will say, this is not for this special town meeting. The other thing I think we should think about, just in
Mm-hmm.
the future, is moving the date of our town election. Because the way the town election falls
Correct.
with the town meeting, you're sort of having new people come in like a month before the town meeting. And so it seems to me the town election should either come well before the town meeting or after the town meeting. So that you're not dealing with a situation where you have a turnover. You know, you're leading up to town meeting, you're gonna have either different selectmen, different school committee members, or what have you at town meeting. It's happened before, right? I mean,
Right.
and it's, you know, you deal with it, but I don't think we should do it this time, just for
But
people
for
to think
future,
about. That
we'll
it just
put on.
seems like for continuity's purpose, you know, given that the way everything revolves and working up to the annual town meeting, to have the continuity of the elected officials into town meeting and then after town meeting. I think I understand why it is the way it is, you know, especially if you like the moderator right before town meeting and all that, but still, you know, if you ever elected a new moderator right before town meeting, it could be disruptive in terms of the planning and meeting the dates of the warrant report and everything, so it just seems.
So one of the other items the moderator I'm talking about is the time of town meeting, which we asked Mark to do some research. We both did research, and it is not stated what time the town meeting actually has to start. So the town moderator for this next annual town meeting, and even in the special, will move it to 7 PM instead of 7:30. He thinks given that extra half hour could really move us forward to avoiding.
You're gonna have to get up early, Bill.
I tried not to look at you while I was saying it. But we could find, there's nothing in the charter that says it has to be set out at 7:30. So if you're okay with that, we will start moving the meeting to 7 PM.
And by the time they get the formal ceremonies and introductions done at 7:30 anyway.
Right, so we figured it gives us a half an hour to maybe get us out in the one night issue.
I mean, I think both of those are good ideas. I mean, we certainly ran into it this past year with, you know, trying to schedule the information sessions and everything else, and some of them coming during school vacation week, and, you know, it's fine for us who don't go anywhere, but for people who go away for vacation, it's, well, you know,
There was somebody else that sent an email that wanted an article put on, and it was to spend a lot of money.
COA?
So do you plan on leaving the warrant open for a week, or opening and closing it tonight?
We're not even opening it tonight, we're just talking about it. We haven't officially opened it.
Oh, okay, so
Yeah.
we can,
Yep.
I'll send you the information on that, and
Is that the Council on Aging, or is that somebody else?
this was something else, and I had 310 emails when I got back from vacation, so I can't remember which one was which.
Okay.
And could I raise another question? I don't know that this even needs to be on town meeting, but I think we all get the copy of Richard DeSorger's email regarding the Layton family land. Basically stating that originally he thought they didn't want it with their name on it, but more recently, in talking with Barbara Layton, it sounded like they did. And I'm not sure if that's something we can just designate as selectmen, or whether that requires a town meeting action. It seemed to me that it was a good thing to do, and given that she just turned 100, it might be better to do it in the fall than pushing it off. If you,
Yeah, right.
Time is of the essence.
Right.
I hope it's not, but it might, it would be better sooner rather than later, especially because she asked. So I don't know if that needs to be on the town meeting.
It would, yeah,
Okay, so I'd suggest we add that.
That's a good idea.
okay.
And for the date, Christine, does the 22nd work for the moderator,
The 22nd worked for the moderator,
generally?
and it worked generally for the schools and the town clerk, but it's not gonna work
I'm
for you,
doing
so.
Monday through Friday that way.
Okay,
Would you
so
be
we'll,
disappointed if we went ahead without you?
I'd actually like to be there, but
So then let's see if we
So
can
let's-
find
if you,
another-
I mean, the 29th is fine. I'm guessing you're pushing that way rather than.
Yeah.
If it doesn't work, tell me it doesn't work and I won't be there, but yeah, I'd actually prefer
Yeah,
to
I
be
think
there.
if we-
okay, let me see if I can get it on the 29th.
Or the 5th, right, it would be the November 5th, and probably the other,
Oh, it's next week? Election day?
November 5th?
the day before Election Day.
Yeah. Okay.
Chris, if you're talking about writing that first Tuesday into some sort of charter or something, I mean, there are instances where the first Tuesday could come before the first Monday, and so that you may
True.
not want to word
Yes.
it that way.
It needs to be,
The following
yeah,
night.
it needs to
following
be
night.
the next day. I got it, yeah. No, you are correct. Okay, so let me look
So
at
you
the
dates
29th.
for The 29th or the 5th.
Yeah, I don't think you're gonna get buy-in on the 5th from the town clerk.
Okay.
So
Oh,
let me-
right, right,
yeah. So let me look at the 29th.
Does that work for you, Pete, the 29th?
Yeah.
Can I make one other comment on the COA article? Only because I listened to last meeting's video, and it sounded like the discussion of the COA article had more to do with how we would fund the article. And my reaction here is that before we worry about funding the article, I mean, if it can go in because it can go in, that's fine, but in terms of our position on the article, we ought to have a discussion about whether we agree with the increase in programming. And I don't say that to imply I'm against it. From what I can tell, what Roberta has done so far has been well-received, and it seems like it's making a difference. So I'm not arguing against doing it, but to me, this is a program service expansion. I don't think we just do this for 6 months and then pretend like we didn't make a decision to increase the COA budget permanently to support this, if that's where we come out as a board.
No, I think we have to discuss it. I mean,
Okay.
regardless of how we come out, they get to put this
Yeah,
on the
yeah,
warrant.
yeah,
so-
yeah. I was reacting to, having watched the video, it seemed like it was purely how do we fund this discussion rather than are we prepared to actually move ahead with an expansion of services?
So one of the other things that I.
Surprised at how many participants they had on the Saturdays.
Yeah, yeah.
One of the other things that I reviewed this afternoon was the senior housing survey results. And one of the things that jumped out at me from that was how few of the respondents actually took part in the programs at the center. It was like 30%, I think. It was a very
Yeah, although
surprisingly low, to me, surprisingly low percentage of the people.
interestingly, and I wasn't gonna I have some stuff I'll cover at the Selectmen's report, but in that you brought that up, one of the things that's interesting, Barbara has taken a crack at drafting the study, and one of the observations she made is, although that may be true, there is a disproportionate number of people, of seniors who are active at the center, who are in the group who definitely want to live here in Medfield. So it's an interesting little parallel.
Well, I think the people that go to the center are very socially
That
tied
may be
into
it.
the community.
Yeah, but
Through
it-
that
yeah.
process of going
Yeah.
there.
So the membership in the center is what it is, but you also have to realize there's a big demographic that are called seniors, and some of them are working. But the thing that was interesting was how many of the active center, center participants basically are committed to wanting to move to senior housing in Medfield if they can.
I mean, and that 30% ties out with the other numbers that they have too, right? If you look at their unique visitors, the number of people who go there versus the number of seniors in town, it's about 30%.
Mhm.
Right, we have roughly 3,000 seniors in town, and her number's usually between 800 and 1,000, I think, for, they have the swipe cards for keeping track of who comes in. I think that's roughly where it lands.
And didn't that survey show the percentage of seniors as a percentage of population was growing?
Yeah.
Which I think is significant, so,
Well, it's true most places,
yes.
in the
Yeah.
United States anyway. Yeah.
The aging baby boomers.
Yeah.
All right, town goals. We had deferred to discuss, because I think in the draft we have, there's still a couple of your comments in here. So I don't know if you've taken those out.
Not sure. Yeah, so the short answer is what you got from me 2 meetings ago shouldn't have any comments in it. I'm kind of.
This one that's in our folder here still has, not sure about this one.
Where you at?
On the first page. 'Cause remember we talked about
Yeah, I think that was, so that I think was actually, I don't think we've talked about this one. So what happened, so what you have here, I took all the inputs and everything I could, reconciled the old goals with the new goals, produced this, and said, okay, everything that I've had, I pulled together and put into this. There were just a very few places where I wasn't sure about whether it needed to go away and needed to stay. So I intentionally put that in for you guys. But the action was the two of you look at it. I didn't expect that I would have any more comments on this because I've been in control of how this thing got written. So I was, at this point, with except for a couple of places there where I put that, where I just wasn't sure that I didn't want to make the call and make it go away. I wanted to actually call your attention to it.
Maybe I imagined, I thought we had actually talked about that one.
I
I would like that one to stay in.
So
Which
we
one
just
are
keep
you
it.
on, number
Rezoning
2
is the
there?
First page, yeah, the rezoning of,
To residential to commercial?
right.
So the reason I said not sure about that one was because, I'm happy to leave it in, it's just so you know why I said it. This is saying, identify at least one parcel of land not town-owned, even if zoned residential, that could be commercially developed. And I was thinking that at the time that we've, if anything, had a trend where we were taking commercially zoned land and converting it to residential, and a lot of our discussions have been about doing that. This one was basically saying we want to take a residential piece of land and convert it to commercial. And I was kind of saying, why is that important? We have plenty of land up at the state hospital we can use for commercial. We have some land that is commercial that we can't figure out how to use yet. So I just didn't understand the thinking
So,
behind that one.
the one specifically I'm thinking about here is the Legion site.
Okay.
That's the one that I
Okay.
have in mind, if we were to identify a site to look at for rezoning as
Yeah.
commercial.
Okay.
And so the point being, there are going to be businesses that, are commercial that don't wanna be landlocked and driven by nobody at Lot 3. There are businesses that are commercial that don't wanna be up at the hospital, but might like to be at a busy intersection that, 10,000 cars go by every day, or some other example, right?
Okay.
Because we have other parcels of land that if you look at the zoning map, particularly in the downtown, kind of around the 27 Main Street, North Street, there are parcels of land that if you looked at them, they could just as easily be commercial, right? It could be an office building next to a house. And so the idea is, in part, on a broader basis, this will be done through the master plan. Because the master plan will look at this town-wide, they'll identify other areas where, okay, this maybe, for the future, should be zoned commercial, even though it's gonna be residential, and as long as the people wanna keep the house there. So the idea is, if we're looking to encourage
Okay.
more commercial development, one of the ways we can encourage more commercial development is by opening up, suitable parcels of land. And the one that came to mind immediately with this was the Legion, because it's zoned RS, but it's right on two busy streets, it's got. potential
And where the
frontage.
Medfield Veterinary Clinic is RS as well. Actually, the Goddard School, I think, is
Yeah.
residential as well, and that's why we have the school there, because they don't have to comply with zoning.
So, I'm my bias has generally been toward promoting commercial development, so I'm not against this philosophically. I reacted a little bit because it said this is what we're gonna do this year, but I'm fine. As long as have our eyes open, that's a goal that we have.
And all we can do.
actually wanna do it, that's
All we
fine.
can do is encourage the planning board to look at it. right?
Yeah.
They can look at it and say, nope.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
I think the
yeah.
planning board is actively looking at the
Yeah.
Legion site for this, but.
Right. And in fairness, it's only saying identify the parcel of land, it's not
Right.
saying do anything with it.
Right.
Were there any
Baby
others?
steps, guys.
Yeah.
The other thing we've talked
that
about for
was it.
years is diversifying our tax base, that we're 95% residential, and that anything we could do to diversify our tax
Right,
base would be.
yeah, I totally agree. And then the last page I had, Pete, I think these were yours, and it was just an issue of, are these all pressing enough that they all need to be objectives? And I wouldn't argue that they can't be, or that I wouldn't fight it, I just kind of, when I looked at them, I said, do they all make the goals for, specific goals, things we really are gonna do this particular year?
Or do they go on our action item list?
Yeah, and I don't care, as I said, whether they're, as long as they're somewhere so that we get them done, so that things just don't get lost.
So you can either give me feedback later, or you can give me feedback tonight, so it kind of,
Yeah, no, I'm happy to have them go onto a to-do list instead of.
On the
I
action
mean, I would guess that the first, so let me take a position then. I would guess that the first one, which is the town administrator coordinating with DPW to develop a public tree inventory, that probably belongs here in the goals. It's not just an action item, that's actually probably something that's gonna take a little bit of work, and it's intended to get the town something. Planting the trees in front of the post office and dressing up the
very
landscape
specific,
and lawn,
yeah.
those two feel like action items to me.
Yep, sure, that's
Okay.
fine.
Okay,
Good for me.
so those.
Tree planting at the post office is going to be our Arbor Day celebration, sometime towards the end of the month.
Have you talked to them?
I've been working with Mo, and Mo's going to talk to them about moving it forward, whether
Okay.
they like it or not.
Have you,
But, well, the last time I talked to them, they were fine
Is
with
our
the
trees-
concept, but they wanted to know the trees and.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
as our Tree City representative, have you picked a species that's going to be planted there yet, or does the post office do that?
I have delegated that to Maurice Goulet, the Director of Public Parks. I'm the bug expert at this point.
So I'll make those updates and I'll have this, but basically it's an administrative drill, and then I guess we have our goals.
And we have our goals.
Are you gonna vote to accept them at the next meeting?
Or we
Or
can
are you
vote to accept them,
gonna vote to
right?
accept them tonight?
And with the revisions that we discussed.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Motion.
So I move that we vote to accept the town goals as revised with the two changes that we've just discussed this evening, and treat them as the final goals for the year.
Second,
All in favor?
yep.
Aye.
All right, licenses and permits, consent agenda. Any objections to any items on the consent agenda? Or questions, concerns?
Wait. Let me get to the other sheet. Where's my other sheet? There
No
it is. I don't
problems
think so.
here.
No, they're all okay. Nope. So, I'm ready?
Yep.
I move that we approve the items on the consent agenda.
Second,
All in favor?
Aye.
yep.
All right. Town administrator update.
Can we skip over the action items?
I think so.
Come in later. There's an action item.
I think I've really given you all the updates over the course of the evening.
All right, acceptance and/or correction of minutes. I had sent around some comments, I think, on the June 26th and August 21st minutes. And then Gus, you had some comments on the August 14th previously.
Yeah, so that's why I guess I couldn't, for some reason, I couldn't find anything updated. So I had the comments previously, but I didn't get an updated set of comments for August. I didn't get an updated revision of my August 14th comments, so my comments from before I left are still my comments. I don't
You
know
didn't
if-
make any comments on the 14th, I don't think. Let me look.
I think,
I thought it was because we didn't give it to you in Word. Let me find it. Did you
not
print
me,
them out for me?
no.
Hold on.
Next question, do I have them with me here? I'm not sure if I brought the I should have brought the 14th, let's see. Yeah, I did, so the 14th. So the comments I had on the 14th, I did not give you an email, I didn't redo that one.
Oh, okay.
I
That's
wasn't
what it
gonna
is.
be here the following one. The comments I had for the 14th is that there was awkward wording in the discussion of lighting the town hall. It's just the wording was
Yep.
awkward.
No, I
And
know.
then the Dick Scolari's
Scolari's
last name is Scoleri. So I didn't see an update to those two things, but those were that was the feedback I had for the 14th.
Okay, we have not updated those. We can
Okay.
update those and get you back.
Okay. So the 14th, we're not ready. The 26th, Mike, I saw the thing you sent me with your revisions. I had sent I did send an email on that. My revisions were probably 85% editorial. There were a couple of comments, not that changed the fundamentals, so there was nothing that you said that contradicted what I said. I basically said, I think you can take both of our revisions and it'll all be fine. The general comment I'll make on a couple of the meeting minutes is that, I did change that one, is that the one thing we're doing is, I think when if the minutes just get typed up from the notes that we take in the meeting, what happens is the minutes start reading like it's actually halfway a recording where something that I say, rather than reporting that Selectman Murby said this, it says I. And so it kind of flops back and forth between being like a recorded transcript and a description, and that's confusing. So it's a perspective issue that was how I reacted to several of these. It just seemed like that's getting a little muddled.
So it's to stick with the first person or the third person?
No, I actually think it should be third person as a report. So rather than,
Yeah.
I mean, if you're gonna do it the way, if it's literally what I said, I said this, or I think this, then it's gonna be in quotes, and it ought to be accurate.
Selectman Murby said this.
Yeah,
or
well, if you say that,
Selectman
that's
Marcucci.
okay, yeah, and
Yeah.
I would keep it out of the
Keeps it
first
in-
person,
Yeah,
because you don't have quotes that good unless you record the whole meeting.
right. So to be consistent, keep it all on the third person.
Right, right. And some of them I did because maybe I found something I wanted to change, so that caused me to save the file and put on track changes. Other ones, it was like I got halfway through it and I realized that the perspective was aggravating me, but I wasn't gonna go back and redo
I
it
think
all.
the only exception to that would be if there was a direct quote.
Yeah, and put in quotes if
It would
it's a
be
direct
odd,
quote,
yeah.
put in quotes. So that's,
So I didn't see your comments on the 26th.
I deliberately didn't send them to you because you had sent yours to me, and I basically said, all right, I'm not gonna send my, but I did send a message to Evelyn and Christine and said, this all looks like you can just mash them together and everything's fine. If you wanna see my comments on the 26th, this is them, so, yeah. it is, so. They were more narrative. On the basketball hoop, I made clear that the reason it got grandfathered was because it had been previously put up before the town accepted the road. And this, I just wanted the record that the way that happened was, it was a road that we accepted.
Yep, great. Okay, we have a motion to approve the June 26th business as corrected by Selectman Murby and Selectman Marcucci.
So moved.
Second? Second? All in favor? Aye. All right. Those are done.
Okay, August 14th is deferred.
August 14th is deferred. August 21st, I think I had comments on that one that I sent around.
This was primarily, for me, the perspective, same thing, perspective. And the only minor things that I had, they were semi-minor. Todd Tarabenko is Chair Pro Tem, not Pro Temp. In fact, he's permanent now because we voted him in at yesterday's meeting, so he's not
Continuing
even,
the streak.
he's not even temp.
Continuing the streak of the pro tem becoming
Right.
permanent.
I had a question under the special town meeting articles. There's two articles pertaining to establishing speed limits, one for 25 miles per hour and the other designate safety zones with a 20 mile per hour speed limit. And this is wording, I don't think we're establishing those speed limits. We're the article pertains to authorizing the town to set these limits. So it's an authorization, it's not an actual establishment. And that is just it's kind of minor, but it's not, if it's
No, it's
in
not,
our
yeah.
record. We haven't established anything yet. This is just getting authorized to do it. And the only other point I had was, I think the last page, the second paragraph on the last page, selectmen agree that a new category be placed on all future agendas, review board of selectmen action list. I believe that same action is on the September 4th meeting. So I think in the minute, so for some reason that paragraph showed up here, and the exact wording of that paragraph, I think also shows up for the September 4th meeting, and I didn't particularly remember that being in our meeting. but it might have been. It's just that it showed up in two different meeting minutes, so it seemed to me it was a remnant going in one direction or the other.
I don't remember which night. There's a chance we did it both nights.
Okay. As long as that is an accurate thing, then good.
I don't remember.
Okay. That's all I have.
That sounds like one of those guys testifying before a congressional committee. I don't remember.
Do we have a motion to approve the August 21st minutes as corrected?
I move that we approve the August 21st minutes as corrected.
So second.
All in favor?
Yep.
All right, September 4th, I didn't have comments on the 4th, did you?
No.
Motion to approve?
Second?
I'll second. All in favor?
Yep.
Aye.
Did I abstain because it wasn't there?
All right, so we're almost caught up. We August 14th and then April 12th.
And April 12th.
All right. Review the Board of Selectmen action list.
There it is. Can I make one comment? On September 4th, this is not the minutes are all fine, but I did go through this around I assume we're gonna have another discussion around the townwide master plan committee makeup and stuff like that. I missed it.
Yeah,
Okay.
I assume so.
Because I did watch the video, some of the conversation you had about others that might be on that committee was definitely, some of my notes from the minutes had to do with that, so just want to make sure that's still a conversation to be had.
Yeah, we should put that on for the second.
Yeah.
We'll appoint it by the 16th, so we should cover that.
Okay. Okay.
October 2nd.
Yep. Okay. And I think on the action list, once again, the ball was in your court. The ball was in your court on anything that you wanted to change about this action list. So what I did was I took Christine's original Excel spreadsheet, didn't make it into a large spreadsheet, but I did add a couple of columns that were lookup tables. One was to figure out who the responsible department would be, so you just put the number in and then it automatically pops up off of this. And the second was to track completion status. So I didn't really do a whole lot of fancy stuff beyond what Christine did, but I did fill a little more in. What happened, Christine sent me a list, action item list that, I don't know, it's existed for a year or something like that. And then we had created things that were at the back of the goals that were action items. I reconciled those. I mapped the comments, mostly from Christine's list, onto this. And what I've done here in the blue column, so I've listed everything. But in the blue column, I've carried a lot of these things as proposed. And the reason I did was because one of us has recommended each one of these actions, but as a Board of Selectmen, we haven't actually accepted them as actions. So they're proposed, they're on the list, but they're not accepted, most of them.
Pete? Comments?
No, I mean, I think it's good to have a accumulation of these things so that we can track them, and this is a great way to do it, so.
So if this looks okay to you, and this is the tool that we want to use for the action item list, I would say at some point, the next step would be for us to work our way, it's a long list, so it might not be all in one meeting, but we work our way down the list to see if all three of us are in agreement, or a majority of us are in agreement that's an action item list that makes the list, or whether we take it off.
Okay.
Okay?
Maybe what we'll do is we'll put that on as a recurring agenda item, and where we have time, we'll try to plow through as many as we can, rather than sort of sit and go through it.
And the only, I think that's the right thing to do. The only urgency is if we're serious about these, most of these constitute instruction to various town departments about things that we're telling them they have to do. And I think the sensitivity we want there is we don't want to micromanage the town departments. And if we really do want them to do these things, then once we've got the list we really want, then you start holding people accountable for this stuff. Otherwise, it doesn't mean anything. So, that makes sense to me. Okay.
Very good. All right, Selectmen report. Pete?
I bumped into Matt McCormick at Medfield Day and just mentioned to him that we had a sort of a plan at some point to maybe have some group look at the downtown, where the Economic Development Committee is no longer doing it, the Downtown Study Committee that he'd been a part of is no longer doing it. He expressed an interest to be part of anything that we come up with, so I thought that was encouraging. I'd mentioned that the Medfield Foundation the legacy fund of the Medfield Foundation is actually engaged in its inaugural round of grant making, and we'll be awarding some grants in the next several weeks. And finally, that the Medfield Coalition for Suicide Prevention is having a film coming on September 26th to the high school. I think it's called The Ripple Effect, or Suicide, The Ripple Effect. $5, movie, night out. That's it.
Josh?
We got a bunch of stuff. Medfield Day was fun. It looked like it was one of the more heavily attended, and the weather cooperated, so it was nice to do that. The State Hospital Development Committee had its first meeting last night, and somewhere in here I have, we modified Todd has been elected chair. We modified the scheduled dates that we had targeted, basically because today was the day the RFI was due, and we didn't meet until last night. That was as soon as we could do it. What we did is we pushed the deadline for the issuance of the RFI out to October 4th, which is a Friday, and that would give us, our next meeting is scheduled for the 27th. So Sarah Raposa did a very nice job of drafting an RFI based on the samples that she had. So we have more than a shell. The key issues for the committee are this is the task coming out of last night's meeting, think through the specific questions that we want to highlight in the RFI that we want developers to come back specifically on. So that would be, one piece of that is going to be get their reactions on the number of housing units and the economics of all that. Another one would be around phasing. There's a bunch of those kinds of questions that we want to put together. So this is not just an RFI that says, look at the master plan, tell us what you think of it. We specifically have some questions. The second item was to have, and these are the folks that have the contacts, not me, I'm the selectman rep, but to come back with a recommended list of the developers, the large-scale developers that we would actually want to go out, reach out to, and invite to respond to the RFI. So if that RFI goes out as of like October 4th, we stuck with the 6 weeks of time to respond, which takes it out to, I think I actually have it here somewhere, but it's like November 20th, something like that. So it's same 6 week window. And then with that, we stuck with the 18th December. So we kind of chewed up the slack at the front end, but we're still targeting having the back end done on time. And committee understands that the one task we have right now is the RFI. Depending on where the votes go and everything like that, there may be, there'll be something that would follow that, but it's focused, it's crisp, it's concise, we know what we got to do. So that's that. The senior housing survey, let me just see what the points are. Yeah, here they are. So Barbara Gips deserves special recognition given the circumstances that she's been facing for the past month or two, and on top of that, her daughter just got married this past week. So just before Barbara left, she sent out a preliminary draft of the senior housing survey write-up. So it's not ready for prime time yet, but it's like a 33-page draft. And she actually did a very nice job given all the other things that might have otherwise distracted her. So there are a few points, I checked with her, a few points just to give you a sense. 695 responses out of 2,204 households. That's a 32% response rate, representing 3,566 individuals. About 20% of the respondents indicated, and this incidentally is me shooting from the hip, playing fast and loose with the numbers. This has not been vetted with the committee, but there's some interesting stuff here. I did check it with Barbara, and she said, yeah, you kind of got it right. Around 20% of respondents indicated they were extremely likely to move to senior housing if available, and then another 30% were somewhat likely to move to senior housing. So basically, about half the respondents indicated a significant interest in senior housing in Medfield. And when you think about the fact that if you looked at who responded and you looked at their ages, and you divided the seniors from the junior seniors, a lot of the ambivalent were the junior seniors who just haven't figured it out yet. So pretty strong response around that. Of the households that expressed the strong interest in senior housing in Medfield, about 30% would move right now. Another third of the group, so 33%, would like to be able to move in 1 to 2 years. So basically, close to 2/3 of the people who indicated that they would be interested would actually be, if we had it, they would be coming right now. That 2/3 is about, if you look at that, if you applied the percentage of people who are extremely interested to the entire 2,204 households, you would wind up with 410 households needed. So this is me playing fast and loose with numbers, but what I'm saying is right now, just, ballpark, we probably have gotten a survey that says we need 350 to 400 housing units. The way we get there isn't necessarily assuming that all 2,204 reflect that, but what's going to happen is, first off, that 410 ignores the somewhat likelies, and it also ignores any seniors coming in from out of town. So for planning purposes, 350 to 400 at this early stage in the game sounds right. The seniors who are interested in senior housing split into two groups, those who need them to be affordable, so that's the 350 to 500,000. And then there's another group, and it's actually a larger group, about 2/3 of the people who are interested actually are more concerned about getting housing that's formatted in a way that's useful. They're not so worried about whether it's 350 to 500,000. Looking quickly at the numbers, I would say that maybe lets you get up to the 600,000 price range, maybe a little above that, but and then there's a bunch of people that are so far up, I don't think we need to worry too much. They're going to do whatever they want. But what that does is it changes what our challenge is, and it maybe changes it in some good ways, because if all of a sudden you're looking at building senior housing, say at the hospital, where many seniors would like to be, and it doesn't have to be a $350,000 home, but it could actually be something that's a little more luxurious at a little better price range, then all of a sudden that becomes more attractive for developers. So I viewed that as good news, pending confirmation. The two most preferred locations for housing are downtown and, interestingly, up at the state hospital. And what the comments that accompanied those were the seniors in picking those two places liked them because they believed they would be close to amenities like restaurants. So I think the state hospital response made an assumption about mixed-use development at the state hospital that would give people something that they could do up there. There is a potential conflict in how seniors answered a couple of the questions. So there's a strong preference for single-floor standalone homes. And there's a preference to be located downtown or the state hospital, which is not where you're going to have lots of room to put single-floor standalone homes. Most people would prefer to buy, but one of the encouraging things we saw is a larger group than we expected who would be willing to consider renting. And so in my mind, what that does is it says, well, if you're going downtown, you're probably going more to an apartment. I'm thinking Dale Street is the ideal location. If you're going to an apartment, you're probably going to rental. The feedback we're getting here says that when people look at this in the grand scheme of things, the advantage of the location may in fact make it attractive to some people who wanted to buy but would live with renting. So that was good.
Well, it'd be interesting to see too, the one that's going up at 80 North Meadows as well, because that has first floor, one bedroom.
Right.
Entrances.
So those are some highlights, I think, on balance. It was a great response. It gives us, for me, it's like, okay, we're talking about 350 to 400 units, and you can cut that 1/3, 2/3 between how much needs to be truly affordable versus what could be getting seniors the kind of a place they want that's easy for them to live in. And there'll be some trade-offs around location versus, standalone homes. I was actually pleasantly surprised the number of seniors said, well, I want a place that I can put my kayak in, but I don't want to have to drive very far. So that some of the interest in the state hospital is not just, I want to be, the state hospital. It's that I want to be the trails and the river. So that's that's early readout on the senior housing survey.
So Gus, one of the statistics that I thought really jumped out at me was, I think it was like 80+% wanted no maintenance. And that flies in the face of ownership, basically, which I thought was sort of.
Unless you're talking about condos.
Yeah, you could, yes, condos, but certainly the rental will get you there too. But I think there's this disconnect between the willingness to think about rental.
Yeah. And I didn't include any observations on rentals as far as rates go, because people, without knowing what it is you're renting, it's a little hard to say what people would be willing to spend, and
I think we're all
on the
just used
surface, they don't
to,
want to spend very much.
I think we've all just gotten used to home ownership, and so that's what we keep thinking of
Yeah.
going forward.
Yeah.
But I think that,
So there was that. I still am trying to close the loop with the folks. I know you both talked to the folks from the Legion to get their readout. I've been in touch with Lori, we just haven't connected, but I'm aware of what's going on there. I just need to have the direct conversation. I had a few questions about things. There was the recycling bin issue that Megan Sullivan had sent you an email that you forwarded to us. I was just curious if we had any discussion, or is there anything? This is putting recycling bins at Park and Rec facilities.
The big issue there is who's going to be responsible for collecting them. And secondly, how do you prevent people, say, from other towns who have to pay to buy bags from using those to get rid of their trash so they don't have to buy bags? So, and I think there were far more, was it 29 barrels or containers that they currently have out?
I don't remember off the top of my head, but I know that Megan and Mo were talking about it at the last transfer station recycling meeting they had last week. I think they were having a discussion about it.
Only because it was on my radar screen, I was just asking. It kind of sounds like we're in still
I think it's a good item for your to-do list.
well, it may be part of a bigger issue around whose budget is supporting what things and stuff like that.
Well, I think it goes to our whole building and grounds discussion we need to start having.
Yeah.
Yep.
I had 12, did anything come of the 12 School Street issue? That was the designation of septic system that was less than the number of bedrooms.
No, they didn't come in.
So they didn't come in, so that's just that issue, okay? And has anything come of the Harding Street property? It may not be appropriate to talk here, because I think our first discussion was a closed session. I'm just curious whether that's active or
I don't think there's been anything further on that.
nothing further on. Okay, I think that was it. That's it.
So I had you may have gotten one as well. I got another email from, and I'm forgetting her name at the moment, but the woman who was trying to sell her house and tied in mistakenly into the private sewer over on Deerfield. And so I had it back and forth. She's still been unable to sell her house. And I spoke with Mark Sorrell, and essentially we're waiting for what happened tonight, which is for the Board of Water and Sewerage to be up to fully staffed. And so I'm out with Randy on the Board of Water and Sewerage. They can have a discussion with the Water and Sewer Board and kind of move that project along. As I alluded to earlier, thanks to Steve Nolan, who's continuing in his service to the town. He has been helping transition the management of the Community Development Corporation from the Affordable Housing Committee. The CDC had fallen out of good standing with the state. He's gotten it back in good standing with the state. And they're meeting tonight to amend the bylaws of the CDC to, currently the CDC board is coterminous with the Affordable Housing Committee board. Now it will be the members of the CDC, it's a membership corporation, will be those members of the Affordable Housing Trust Board who want to be members of the CDC, who will then elect a board of directors of the CDC. And then we can terminate the Affordable Housing Committee and that will be brought under
The accounting department was asking me today about the spending that has taken place for affordable housing, and they were concerned about whether we were going to have to issue temporary bonds or something to cover that. Has the money from the CDC been transferred to the affordable housing, and are we using that money to pay for the ongoing costs?
No, we're going to leave the money with the CDC. And I've been working with Georgia and Joy on expenditures for the Affordable Housing Trust, and we'll do a note.
No, okay.
Yeah.
I think you can only do a note for 2 years, though,
Yes,
and then you have to
correct. But
convert it
we
to permanent
anticipate-
financing.
Yeah, we anticipate permanent financing within the next 2 years.
Yeah.
There likely will be a Dale Street related bond issue, right, that we can
Yeah.
piggyback on.
Yeah.
Because we haven't used very much of that authorization. So not as much as you wouldn't do a
Yeah.
Right.
bond issue of, I think we
Yeah.
spent less
Yeah,
than
we have-
$100,000.
Yes, we're 25,000 for
Yeah.
Tilden. I think it's less than 60 at this point, because
Yeah.
we haven't gone out to bid on a new affordable housing consultant either, so.
Yeah, although technically there's nothing in there until we do float a temporary note.
Right, Joy is going to let us borrow against George's borrowing of that.
Yeah, yeah. And I think you can go up till June 30th on that, as
Correct.
long as it's by the end of the fiscal year.
So, we'll not have to spend anywhere near that authorization, so we'll see. You saw the memo in here from the Affordable Housing Trust Board with respect to 96 Adams Street. The next meeting for the Affordable Housing Trust Board is October 4th. Tentatively, we expect this Mayrock Development, who is having a butters meeting with respect to their proposal at the Legion, to be into the Affordable Housing Trust Board on October 4th. That's not yet confirmed. We will also likely be attempting our first use of the town's remote participation policy for boards and committees at that meeting. So we'll see how that goes. We'll see how the DPW building works. I did want to talk about, and this is, we can do, is schedule and what we're going to be doing at some of the major action items we have to cover at our upcoming meetings. October 2nd, I think we should complete our discussion and make whatever vote we're going to make on the appointment of Christine as town administrator that night. I think that this October 2nd, given the schedule you just outlined, Gus, that should also be the night for us to vote approval of the RFI, the issuance of the RFI.
We targeted October 4th to have it done, so we may
Okay.
not be able to, may have to wait one on that.
Okay, well, I wouldn't want to wait till our meeting on the 16th.
Do you, so first question, do we need to approve the RFI?
I mean, I've been operating under the assumption that we should,
Okay.
that we ought, that the Board of Selectmen ought to approve the, I don't know if Mike or Christine, you have a view on that. I think we should. Just to make sure,
I think you should all be on the same page.
yeah, that we're asking the questions we want to ask. And, I mean, the purpose of the RFI is to provide input to the Board of Selectmen in determining what to do with the master plan. So I think,
Yeah, what I'm saying is you want to approve it before the deadline, that's all. But let me check with Todd. I mean, it's 2 days, one way or the other. We're meeting on the 27th, so it may be that, probably we know better on the 27th whether
Yeah.
it's easy to push that in, pull that in, but.
yeah, I mean, maybe we have to review a draft and provide input on the
Yeah.
second and provisionally approve it. I don't
Okay,
want to push it
okay,
back to the
all right.
16th.
Yep,
But, I mean, my assumption
No,
is that the
we don't
RFI will be
either.
issued by the board.
Okay.
October 16th, I think I don't know if it was included, yeah, it's in here. Tim Bonfati's resigned from the school committee, so we'll need to hold a special election to elect his replacement. And that will occur hopefully on a meeting on October 16th. I spoke to Anna May. I think that works for the school committee members who are the other electors in the special election. We'll hold that on the 16th. And then with respect to the 96 Adams Street lip, I haven't heard from Sarah or from the developer about when they want to bring that up. I think we could do that either on the 16th or on November 6th. You know, the one reason to do that on the 6th is I don't know whether if the senior housing overlay district passes the special town meeting, the interim, whether that might change Mr. Burley's view on under which zoning program he wants to go for this particular proposal. And he may find if it would fit within the overlay district, he may look at it and say that he'd rather apply for a special permit with the planning board rather than.
And I had just a quick question on this, if you know. The four of the units are affordable, and they are affordable senior housing, and the state will allow us to count that. The other 12 units, are they senior-friendly?
They're
It's
all senior, it's
housing.
all over.
Okay, I just want to make sure I understood that, okay.
It's basically,
Good,
you know,
okay.
I think of it as like Turtle Brook on the other side of the railroad.
Yeah,
track.
yeah,
It's the
okay,
same kind
okay.
of setup.
Okay.
The houses are a little taller, houses are a little bigger. Then November 6th will be the budget hearing, right, the departmental budget hearing?
On the 6th, yep.
Right, that makes sense, that's,
That's where the warrant committee will issue their,
warrant committee guidance.
so I should have probably mentioned this before. Mike Pastore sent me an email about meeting with the warrant committee to talk about the budgeting framework that we've discussed, but prior to that, regardless of the warrant committee, I had recommended that you probably need to figure out what you're doing in October, so I ought to talk sometime by then. But we, to the extent that we want to adopt it, regardless of what the warrant committee does, we probably should figure that out before the 6th.
Okay, so November 6th for the hearing. So the third Tuesday in November is the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. So I was gonna suggest that instead of meeting the 20th, we meet on the 27th. Just because that's a tough week for a lot of people. I don't know. I mean, I'm here and I'm available, but I don't know.
I think, I have a note that we met the Tuesday of Thanksgiving last year, and we all decided that was a really bad idea.
Yeah, that's my
So-
recollection as well.
Might have been me that made that note.
Yeah. I know Mike, you'll probably have at least 2 turkeys to be making that week, so
Yes, I'll have
do
to.
it.
It should work all right. Yeah, that should work.
So November 27th, and I have a conflict on December 4th. And so if it worked for all of you, I was gonna suggest we meet on December 11th and December 18th.
I think that works better for me, because I think I have a conflict on the 4th, too.
There we go.
So the 11th and the 18th?
Yes.
11th and 18th.
Does that work for you, Pete?
Yes.
All right.
Yep.
And I'll talk to Pastori as well in terms of just scheduling and what day to put that discussion on, the budget framework piece of it.
Mhm.
Any other, either department heads or other folks we should be trying to schedule in?
I have one thing, your financial policy that you voted to approve also needs signature from the warrant committee and the school committee,
Not the warrant committee.
just the school committee.
Yeah.
I went to post it on the website today and realized we were missing that, so we should, I will talk to Dr. Marsden about having that put on their
For the
agenda.
next agenda, yeah. And I'll just confirm the 16th of Anna May, but when I spoke to her, she thought that would work, and it's gotta be within 30 days of Tim's resignation, which was officially today, so that fits within that time period.
You're gonna have a special election for the library trustees as well. Do you wanna do it the same night, or do you want me to push it to the 6th?
Well, we can do that as well. Who's stepped down?
You know, I'm not exactly sure who's stepping down, but Lauren Feeney did tell me she had somebody stepping down, and they wanted to know what the process was, so.
Okay. Yeah, if they wanna do it if it works for the library trustees, I know there's one library trustee here, but she's not listening to the meeting anymore, so.
Colleen? Who's leaving the Board of Trustees early? The Library Board of Trustees?
Gina?
Gina, that's it.
Any reason you can't do an election for her replacement on October 16th?
Is there any reason why we cannot?
Right, well, you personally, you're the only one who's here, so.
We're scheduled,
I will email the board to see if they could all be
Okay.
here.
We have our meeting Thursday, this Thursday, so,
I'll send Lauren an email right now,
okay.
yeah.
Okay. But that would be fine, that would work for you to do it that night as well?
So, an election on the 16th?
Yeah, so,
Okay.
October. So the way it works is that the spot is filled by a combined vote of the trustees and the Board of Selectmen. They elect the replacement to fill out the term until the next
Oh,
election.
an election between the boards?
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay, so the Board of Selectmen and the trustees?
Right, but there's nominations and everything.
is there a
It's
replacement
just-
candidate?
No, we were going to make it, no, we haven't really discussed it. We didn't know if, quite honestly, if we could just leave it vacant until March. We weren't sure with a lot of other things going on. That was our thought process, but we didn't
So-
know what the rules were.
You can,
Okay.
with the approval of the Board of Selectmen. According to Mark, you can fail to notify the Board of Selectmen that you have a vacancy, and then the Board of Selectmen can determine whether or not they would like to fill it on their own.
Or we can request
Yeah.
leaving it vacant.
Yeah.
All right, so I think we'll have that discussion on.
If you want to have that discussion Thursday, and then
Yes.
I'll touch base with Mark on Thursday morning just to confirm that.
And I believe you have 30 days after the resignation to
Okay.
submit the request to the selectmen for the special election.
Okay, so we have 30 days to make that, we have 30 days to ask them that question.
Yeah, and actually, if you're talking about October, you don't have 30 days, but,
Also,
but that's what the law is on it.
in other words, the sooner the better when she submits her resignation, if we want to make that request. we do it.
If you can recruit a candidate that quickly.
Or make the request to just leave it vacant.
Yes.
Oh, apologize. Here it is. Yes, or request to leave it vacant. We can make either request. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, we'll discuss it Thursday at our meeting. Thank you.
Anything else? We have a motion to adjourn.
Move that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? All right. Thank you, everybody.